if we're doing that, I mean, maybe we need to give some landowners in Omaha the similar treatment on their sprinkler systems and stuff like that. Now, I'm joking because obviously irrigation feeds the entire planet, and sprinkling system just hopefully makes your lawn look a little better. So clearly, there's a huge difference between feeding people versus watering grass. But my point is there should be some justification on the record of why this is necessary. So uh, I don't know if Senator Bostelman queued in, but I hope he did, and Senator Friesen. So I will stop there and listen to some conversation and maybe ask some questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Debate is now open on FA 129. Senator Bostelman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's go through 1074 just a little bit for everybody's knowledge. This is a one-time $50 million transfer from cash reserves to the Surface Water Irrigation Cash Fund, which comes from my bill, which was LB 1074. Following the Gehring-Laramie tunnel collapse in 2019, the state of our critical surface water infrastructure, which provides farmers with essential water, needed to be examined. As chair of the Natural Resources Committee, I introduced LR 117, which surveyed irrigation districts, reclamation districts, public power districts, canal companies, and other surface water projects to examine the condition of surface water irrigation projects and infrastructure, understand the status of projected costs of infrastructure, rehabilitation projects, and evaluate the anticipated effects relating to completion or delay of those projects. I do have LR 117 with me, or you could look it up online if you'd like. The survey found that many irrigation systems in central and western Nebraska have significant aging and deterioration problems in their flumes, head gates, and checks, with some as old as 100 years old. There were significant costs associated with completing these projects, which total approximately $150 million. So why is this important? Well, many of these districts are very small and made up of volunteers who do not have the available funds for these projects, as they do not have taxing authority, only the assessment authority. And they rely on user fees charged to the farmers and to the members. The investment into these projects do not just benefit irrigators, but all Nebraskans. This investment works to provide significant groundwater recharge within the operating projects and beyond, to even benefit the river flows and groundwater enhancements to communities like Kearney, Grand Island, Lincoln, and Omaha that rely on sustainable groundwater sources for domestic and business demands. Return flows in the Panhandle have generated excellent cold stream return flows for fishery enhancements in that immediate area. Deliveries of surface water have also provided groundwater storage where prior groundwater was not available under Panhandle lands. This bill provides critical needed funds to begin to address the $150 million in needs for surface water irrigation systems. This one-time transfer establishes a grant program with a maximum award of $5 million per applicant who need to provide a 10% match. So as what Senator Wayne was saying before, so these projects that we have out there, and we can talk about this a little more, Bureau Land Reclamation began some of these projects that are out there. The farmers, the landowners out there actually pay for those projects over time. There's also different types of systems that are put in that are paid for. And what's happened now is that these systems are aged, 70 years, 80 years old, and they need rehabilitated. One of the things I talked to Senator Wayne about, what they do is there's certain companies out there, there's a couple specifically that I've looked at, actually toured their facilities. One of them is called Rubicon, and they do a replacement, the gates, the head gates and that, and they run everything computerized. Significant savings on water, significant savings on efficiencies, significant cost savings to the areas. And this would help in some of these areas to provide those type of systems to take that aged system out that's leaking, that's wasting, or water that maybe is leaving the system in a sense that they now can capture more of that water and keep more of that water there and utilize it more efficiently, rather than having perhaps
1 minute
a ditch runner. You can call for the inches that you need on the computer. If it rains, then you shut it off. You cancel that call, so you don't call that water. It's a huge water saver. That's a huge opportunity for these irrigation. And the purpose of this is for the little guys, for the small systems that are out there, the folks who can't afford to replace this. And remember, these are farmers. These are folks out there that are growing the food, feeding the livestock, doing the things. In Western Nebraska, this is their only choice. This is perhaps is their only option. And we saw that when that Laramie tunnel collapse happened here a couple of years ago, and the state and this body took significant action to help address that as well, the Gehring and Laramie tunnel collapse. This is a significant issue for central and western Nebraska, and I'll be glad to try to answer other questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Bosselman. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So my next amendment basically removes all of the funding for this, what he's just trying to reduce funding for. So I will spend my time talking on the amendment that's before us, and then when it comes time for my amendment, I will pull it. But I want to have this is where I think everybody should be paying attention, and I'd want everybody to learn a little bit about the difference between groundwater irrigation and surface water irrigation. And I'm hoping that Senator Erdman and some of the others who are more familiar with the canal system and who pays what and how that system is maintained can join into this discussion as we move on in trying to decide if this funding should happen or not. So I'll give an example of a groundwater irrigated farm. We don't have programs where the federal government has come in and help drill wells and develop our irrigation systems. We did that all on our own. And so today, if you wanted to put in a groundwater irrigation well and put in a corner system pivot, which irrigates probably around 150 acres of a 160 acre quarter, you would invest, if your pivot lasted for 40 years, just give or take, you're gonna have a $25 an acre investment plus maintenance repairs on that you're gonna have to do yourself. And then if you look at the cost then of the fuel to pump the water, you're gonna be adding another $40 to $60 an acre on top of that for the cost of pumping the water. Now, when you take water from an irrigation district, that's where I'm interested in seeing what water delivery costs and what these guys are being charged per acre foot or however they measure the water. But I will say maybe that they haven't been charging enough that they can set aside some money for maintenance of their system. Because when you have a system like that is built, and if I understand correctly, this was a federal project back in the day where you build the reservoir, Lake McConaughey, and then you build a series of canals and irrigation ditches off of that. And in those private irrigation districts that were formed, I think they either got a long-term low-interest loan from the federal government. They're probably still paying that off, I'm not sure. But I'm interested in the charges that they pay for delivery of that water and their irrigation versus what we do in groundwater. And so I know when we talked LB 962, our water law, that was always a big discussion on how we manage our river flows, whether we manage them for fish and wildlife and the endangered species, or if we have to manage them for irrigation. And so the canal system is great. It recharges groundwater wherever the canals are. It's an efficient way to move surface water around. But as far as delivering water for irrigation, it's kind of inefficient because you might be delivering or you might be diverting 3 acre feet of water to get 1 foot of irrigation water. It just depends on how much everybody's using and how they're applying it. So this is a discussion I think I'm looking forward to finding out just what is the maintenance, who has been paying for it, and whether or not enough has been charged for irrigating those fields that they can build up enough of a reserve to pay for maintenance of that system. With that, I'm looking forward to the discussion as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Friesen. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I was very much looking forward to this conversation because when I was reading through the budget proposal, this was one of the ones I had flagged as needing for me to understand further. But before I go into the nitty gritty of my questions and concerns. Senator Bosselman, I think, referred to a company called the Rubicon. Is that right, Senator Bosselman? Yep. So I wonder if I'm the first person to make this reference today. So the Rubicon is a river in Rome, in Italy, in the Roman Empire. And when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with the Roman army and did not give up being the general, he became a dictator. And that was crossing the Rubicon has become a metaphor for crossing like some sort of ultimate line. I mention that because today, Julius Caesar comes to mind, as today is considered the Ides of March, which is another reference to Julius Caesar. And in the play by William Shakespeare, he is warned by the soothsayers to beware the Ides of March. And if we all recall what happened to Julius Caesar on the Ides, March 15th of that year, was that he was stabbed by the other members of the Senate. So as we stand in the floor of the Senate of the state of Nebraska, it's always good to consider how much worse it could be. But I appreciate Senator Friesen's comments. I was staring at him intently because I have undertaken to try to learn more about water law, because it has in water policy, it's come up a lot. And in this year, at my time on the Natural Resources Committee, I appreciate Senator Wayne talking about this topic, and I appreciate Senator Bosselman taking questions. And I wonder if Senator Bosselman would yield to a question.
Senator Bosselman, would you yield?
Of course.
Senator, how many of these irrigation districts are there? I apologize if that was already asked.
I can tell you for sure, but I want to say there's 60 or 70 of them.
My number that I looked up quickly was 64, maybe.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
And so, I know you said this is the little guys. Do you have any idea what the average size number of individuals they serve?
The average what?
Number of individuals, number of farms, acreages.
Each one's different. I can tell you the Frenchman has 45,669 permitted acres. Now, how many individual owners of that? I can't tell you. Each one's different. Some of them are very small with just a handful, and some of them are much larger.
Thank you for that. I'm curious. So like I said, I saw this in the budget, and I was looking through, trying to do my homework and due diligence, and I saw this, and I thought, are there 5 of these? Are there 1,000 of these? I don't know. So 64 was the number I found. I think there might be a census from a year or so ago. And I remember that I think it was the Natural Resources Committee. One of the very first exec sessions I had here, we talked about elections of these boards. I know people said they're volunteers, and I think I heard a bill that said the boards could be elected by members outside of the state of Nebraska if the district was on the border. And I don't know if I still have Senator Bosselman yielding question. Do you recall that bill, Senator? Or am I misremembering that? Was that not a natural resources bill?
Can you say it again?
Where members for the natural resource or for the irrigation districts could reside outside the state of Nebraska. Was that?
We had one bill. Senator Hughes had that bill. Last year before, it's clear in the southwest corner of the state where there's just a couple counties, very small area, a couple thousand acres, I think, total. That's when you talk about, and 63 is a number of is the number of
thank you,
surface water irrigators.
Thank you, Senator Bosselman. And so I'm seriously just trying to get the lay of the land and understand what we're talking about, is why I'm asking these questions at this point. So I'll push my light again and keep talking. But so we did have a bill that I thought it applied to any that were similarly situated, but there was one particular irrigation district that was on the border of the southeast corner of Nebraska, and some of the individuals resided in the state of Colorado as well. If that's my recollection. If somebody, I would be corrected if I'm incorrect about that. I will ask off the mic. But thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Bosselman. Senator Urban, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon. I got here just in time to have a discussion about the water. Let me try to answer a few of the questions that Senator Friesen has. Generally, the major irrigation canal districts in my area the water charge, or the O&M, they call it, operation and maintenance, runs in that $30 an acre category. The smaller irrigation districts that draw out of the river and have a water right to do that, their water right is less because they don't have to maintain the dams and the lengthy canal to get the water to their farm. We are not purchasing water. We pay for the operation and maintenance of the system. And so what has happened over time, Senator Friesen, is these canals were constructed in the early 1900s, and some of those head gates were put in that period of time, and they're steel, and they've kind of rusted away, and we have to make some changes on the diversions and some of those other projects that they have that they function with every summer. And so this bill that Senator Bosselman put in place is an opportunity for these smaller districts to make an application for a grant process so that they can fulfill the need to replace some of these ailing or aging facilities. And so when you talked about, as an irrigator in eastern Nebraska, you drill a well, and then you pump the water from that well, and then you have the cost of the pivot, plus you have the electrical cost to distribute the water. These gentlemen or ladies that farm in my district have those similar costs. They buy pivots and place those on the land. The water is delivered to their property from the irrigation district. They then pick up the water from there with a pump, and they pump that through their pivots. And generally, most of the land in my district is now pivot irrigated. There are a few surface irrigation or gravity irrigation fields left, not that many. And so they have the electrical costs as you have, they have the pivot costs as you have, but they have property tax, maybe not quite as high as yours, but $50, $60 an acre. And then you add the $30 an acre O&M charge for the water that is delivered to their property. And so when the water is short and we don't have the snow melt and the runoff in the mountains in Wyoming, then they are restricted in how much water they get. And when they have a pivot that pumps 800 gallons a minute, you can't restrict that down and pump 600. So what they do is they do a rotation. And so that pivot may be on for 5 days and off for 2 while someone else is using that same water. And so it's an issue for us in Western Nebraska to use this source of money to catch up with those projects that are aging and are in need of replacement. And so I believe that this is an opportunity for us to catch up and do those things that they would have to raise exorbitant amount of taxes or O&M charges to make up the difference. So one of the best places to store water is underground. And so as we in the western part of the state receive water from Wyoming and we irrigate with it, and then it goes into the aquifer, and guess who gets it next? Eastern Nebraska. And water runs downhill. And so when we use water out there, everything that's not used by the crop gets into the groundwater and it moves on to the east. And then the farmers there can enjoy it as well. So as time went by, the more pivots, thank you. As time went by, the more pivots that were put in, the less runoff or recharge from one irrigation system to the next was realized. And so consequently, we become more efficient. And we've also tried to be very good stewards of the water, because water is very important to us. We only receive about 14 to 15 inches of rain annually. And those 2 days when we get that is pretty tough. And I make that as a joke, but we get a lot of heavy rains early sometimes, and it's not spread out through the growing season. And so if you have a center pivot and you miss a day or two, it really affects your yields. So if you have any more questions that I may try to help you with, I would be glad to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Urban. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start out by letting Senator John Cavanaugh know that I'm going to yield him my time if he wants to make his way back. But I am going to speak about some of the remarks that Senator John Cavanaugh made about the Ides of March. I'd like to start out with, has anyone ever heard of car talk? Click and clack, the siblings? feel a little bit like this was a click and clack moment from our ride this morning where we discussed the Ides of March. And while Senator John Kavanaugh brought out the doom and gloom of the Ides of March, Ides actually is the middle of a month and means that it is when it is most likely to be a full moon. So I looked, we are not in a full moon today. We are in a waxing gibbous, and which the definition of is confusing to both Senator Kavanaugh's of what a gibbous is. But we are in a waxing gibbous and we will have a full moon on March 18th. And thankfully for all of us, we will not be here together. That's probably the best thing. So I will yield the remainder of my time to Senator John Kavanaugh to talk more about Ides of March or what have you.
Senator John Kavanaugh, 3 minutes 48.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, other Senator Kavanaugh. In the play Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare, the Ides of March was the 15th. However, it is not always the 15th, apparently. This is something I learned today. And yes, a waxing gibbous moon is a very confusing definition. But I think my comment stands about, still at this moment, stands about the floor of the Nebraska Senate being a more pleasant place to be on this particular March 15th than the March 15th of whatever year that was, the year 6680 or something, or BC, or not exactly, I can't remember these. But I guess since I have the time, I push my light. I'm going to continue to talk about the irrigation district funds. And to put it in the context of everything we've been talking about, I appreciate, and I am no expert on these issues, but I am making, I think, a good faith effort to learn about water allocation issues and the things that go along with it. So the Surface Water Irrigation Fund, we're allocating $50 million. And I wrote in my note here, how many? Got that question answered. Irrigation districts are there. And then to give $5 million to each one, or the maximum of $5 million with a 10% matching fund, means that an irrigation district could get $5 million by putting up $500,000. And I recognize I don't fully understand all of the ins and outs of this, and I appreciate the continued conversation on this, but that's a pretty substantial amount of money for a small commitment. As Senator McDonald, I will continue to reference his strategic command because it's on the similar page here, but we're putting up $20 million and the other side and we are last dollars in, and I think he said they had to put up 60 million or 40 million. So there's a substantial other commitment from others to get state of Nebraska dollars to that. And there's a lot of other 50% match on the Stratcom conversation we had earlier. Or our match is a maximum of 50%. So we're not putting in more, but in this instance, we are committing to put in 90% of the money, up to 90% of the money, which is certainly a generous on this side of the state of Nebraska. I recognize how important water is to agricultural production, certainly in the western part of the state of Nebraska, and that, as Senator Erdman correctly,
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, correctly pointed out, the application of water in Scottsbluff then fills up, recharges, the water flows in the eastern part of Nebraska and continues through that cycle as we go east and downhill. So these folks do apply that water to that land, and we do get some return on that. And of course, there's a cost. I'll run out of time here, but I've got my light pushed, so I'll keep talking later. But this is a question again. This is $50 million out of the appropriation. Is this the right amount of money? Is this the return on the investment for the whole state of Nebraska? And this, I think, is important parts of this conversation. Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Stinner, you recognized?
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been sitting back enjoying the ride and listening to the commentary, and it's good commentary, good questions, and I do truly appreciate it. But it came to my attention just here recently that there are a lot of people that are concerned, a lot of people, I don't know who they are because they've never talked to me until right now, that you have to be on appropriations in order to get your bill passed. And they float number 4, page 4. It's all appropriation. Well, first of all, it isn't, but that's besides the point. So I went back and I'm going to keep score for you. Okay. These are budget bills that came to the committee. 32 of them. Now, I have nothing to do with referencing, folks. 32 bills asked appropriations to hear their bill, to exec on their bill. That means 20 of those bills were carried by appropriations members. That shouldn't be a surprise. If somebody outside wants an appropriations type of bill, generally you pick somebody on that committee. If it's a revenue bill, somebody from revenue is the likely person to carry that bill. I would submit to you all the committees are approximately the same because you want to have that expertise, you want to have that voice. 12 people came to our committee were referenced to our committee, 12 bills were referenced to us. And here's how unfair we were. We passed on 10 out of the 12. And, let's keep score here. $283 million is what we put as requests that actually were processed for appropriations to the cash reserve. 283, not 500. Of that, committee members got 108. I got 52. I got 26 and 26 for providers out of the 108. Outside members got 174 million. You know, and by the way, it was brought up, geez, look at this schedule on the back, the second one on ARPA, how unfair the appropriations is. The governor got $638 million. That's 63% of the total. Actually, if I put the 150 that we had to pull out because it didn't qualify, he'd have been about 80%. The appropriations number is what we worked on as an appropriations committee. It could be anybody's bill. Anybody's bill. The 20 that came from the other committee was something that came on Lincoln Water. And we execed on it and we decided 5 hands, got it, 5 hands, we got passed. That's how it works, folks. You know, if there's anybody that has tried to be fair and balanced in this place, I believe I'm at the top of the list. I believe my committee is. We don't give preferences. We look at the merits of it. And to even insinuate that just brings it to just a base level. We're going to discredit this committee. We're going to discredit this budget. Because look at the individuals who carried these bills. They're all unappropriated. Well, they're not. If you think I'm mad, you better believe it. Nobody has ever questioned my integrity or my honesty. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. Senator John Kavanaugh, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I continue to not question or malign the work of the committee. I think, at least my perspective is it's our obligation to talk through these ideas here in this broader context and not to criticize the work of the committee, but to disagree if we disagree and to articulate our disagreements and our specific reasons for thinking that for disagreeing and why other things should be a higher priority. Of course, I respect the work of the Appropriations Committee and Senator Stinner, and I appreciate his mentorship here and helping me understand this process. And I'm actually quite sad he won't be here going forward because I think I still have a lot to learn, and particularly could learn more from him. And so I appreciate again, but I think that it is our obligation to continue to have these conversations and questions and comments as they pertain to the issues. And so as this issue, the Surface Water Irrigation Fund, I continue. The reason I put down how many, and the reason I asked how many individuals are part of those, each of those irrigation districts, is to try to put my arms around the idea of cost-benefit analysis questions again. $50 million in appropriations. How many people is that going to help? How many Nebraskans is that going to help? What is the return on investment for the state of Nebraska for that amount of money? I can't answer that question at the moment, but I continue to try to understand it and articulate and see what that is. And so that is why I asked those questions, and that's why I put it in that context. I understand and recognize that, as Senator Erdman has talked about, that there are ancillary benefits outside of the direct appropriation cost, and that is true of so many appropriations. When people stand here and say, what this money is only helping so many people, things like housing assistance, homelessness assistance, rental assistance, those have direct benefits to individuals, and to several thousand individuals were helped by the rental assistance, the ERA funds that the city of Omaha, Douglas County, Lancaster County took, the state of Nebraska. Those individuals were helped by that. But it also had ancillary benefits, being improving employment, school performance, healthcare outcomes, criminal justice related outcomes. There were a lot of hard to quantify other benefits. And so it is important that we consider those ancillary external benefits, those things that sink down into the soil and migrate to somewhere else that you might not see on the surface, as Senator Erdman is talking about. And that is something we need to consider with all of these other questions, is not just the direct benefit of these however many 63 irrigation districts and the however many individuals that those irrigation districts comprise of, but also what is the broader effect of the state of Nebraska. So that is, I think, important. I would like to, I don't know, and maybe it's not answerable to all those questions, but those are the considerations when we say how much is the appropriate amount of money, what else, of course, should we do with this money, as Senator Wayne's proposal here is 25 million off of this, down to 25 million. Is that enough money to accomplish the objective we're talking about? Is the return on investment on that going to be enough that, and then we apply that 25 million to some other program that maybe would yield a higher benefit? And of course, if this is a beneficial program, maybe we should do an ongoing appropriation we should spend more money in the future. And that's kind of my next point, is one of the reasons for this.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the arguments for this bill, well, I guess I can take it up on my next time, so I don't have to be truncated. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Friesen, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Bosselman yield to questions?
Senator Bosselman, would you yield?
Yes.
So Senator Bosselman, I've been talking a little bit about how groundwater irrigation works and the costs associated with that. Senator Erdman touched on several things on how the irrigation districts works. And in your bill, you've talked a lot about the total cost of what we're looking at here on some of the maintenance things. And could you give me a kind of a round number of what the total cost of probably the back maintenance, the backlog that we have in surface water irrigation districts?
Well, if we include all 63,
Yeah,
the
even if
majority
you'd
of them,
include it all.
that was 150 million. What we had was what we're looking at. But if you go down to head gates or something like that, we're in the 15 million in some areas, and then that's a little bit less when you get into the others. It's 113 million.
So one of the things that I hadn't thought of, and I think Senator Erdman maybe touched on it, and I know you did, is sometimes when a canal crosses a road or a highway, you put in it's a flue, I think they call it. Would you tell me a little bit what it costs to replace one of those?
Sure. If you go to Pathfinder Irrigation District, it's about 2 million. If you go to the 9 Mile Irrigation District, it's 40,000. If you go to the Empire Canal System, it's 15,000. So it really depends upon the structure, how big it is.
Okay, so sometimes on the other side of that, you might only be irrigating a couple thousand acres, and you've got a huge expense of replacing that flue. Those types of things where you would have a hard time coming up with the funds, would you say?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Senator Bosselman. So this does kind of explain a few things. I still, again, without understanding the districts and how much they've been charging in the past, this is something that I would expect them to make sure that they're charging as much as they can so that they can build up a maintenance fund and take care of these systems, because that's what others have to do. And we see that all across, I guess, the state when we're doing things. In the past, the university puts up buildings, but doesn't do maintenance, and then they come running to us and need extra money for maintenance of those buildings. So we have to make sure that each of us is taking care of our own maintenance as we're going forward. But I can see where these costs are sometimes excessive, and there's no way that the irrigators on that line could afford the ability to pay for these types of improvements to their system. But it is important, and the irrigation out there, I mean, they do receive a lot less rain than we do. And again, if the water isn't in the lake, if Lake McConaughey is low, there have been years where they haven't received their allocation, and they still have to pay those delivery charges. Even if they don't get water, they have to pay for the maintenance of that flat fee that they're charged. So I think, I'm not convinced yet maybe that it has to be a whole 50 million, but I am supportive of putting some money to this as I learn more about it. And that's one thing that I think we're doing here is everybody is talking about their systems and the needs that are out there and who is affected by that. And when I heard you mention 9 Mile Canal, I thought parts of that were abandoned, but that's my recollection from back in the day. So I'm going to be listening to anybody else that has any better information on some of these surface water irrigation projects, but it does look like there is a need. And I think this, I guess, from my standpoint, would have,
1 minute.
I don't know if it qualified for ARPA funding, but this would have been a good example of one-time maintenance fees where ARPA funding maybe could have been used. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Bostelman. Senator Bostelman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me touch on a few things we talked about already and bring up a couple other points. Senator Friesen and I, we've been talking on the side a little bit about this. What Senator Urban said earlier, the efficiency is what they use now. A lot of this is used mainly through pivots. So they are used to this and run through pivots. So we're talking about efficiencies of use of water. And that water then either recharges the groundwater where it's at or it moves down into the Platte River system. And that system, benefits clear across the state and a lot of different areas, our wildlife and our cities and development, those type of things. So that was looked at, and some other things to look at as we're talking about costs. I'll just give you some costs in this. Alliance Irrigation District for head gates and diversion, $150,000. Browns Creek Irrigation, $200,000. Castle Rock Irrigation, $900,000. Chimney Rock, $1 million. So there's different needs. Frenchman Valley for checks is $100,000, $75,000 for head gates. These are some estimates of projects that they know. They went out and they've done the work on these already as far as estimating out what these costs would be as they come in. Midland Overland Canal is $50,000. Middle Loop, 1.2 million. 9 Mile Irrigation, $150,000. Pioneer Irrigation, $1 million. Sargent Irrigation, $500,000. And the point of what we're doing here with this is identifying, what we've done is identifying those smaller surface water irrigators, those farmers, those ones that are out there that just have a handful of volunteers, farmers that are out there that form these irrigation districts or surface water irrigators, that they do pay annually for O&M. So in the Frenchman, for instance, and Senator Friesen and I were talking about this. So the Frenchmen, they do, and others, they do get inspected. Let's see, let me find it here. They do get inspected by the Bureau every year. And so they do maintenance on that. But when you have a 70 to 100-year-old system, there's some things that are going to fail. And when those things fail, like a flume that goes underneath the road is pretty darn expensive. And that's just beyond the capability of that small irrigation district or those surface water irrigators. The Frenchman Cambridge Irrigation District, as I said, serves 45,669 permitted acres, maintains 150 miles of canals and over 100 miles of buried pipe laterals. So Frenchman Cambridge's water users are currently repaying the federal government for the construction costs associated with the project. The construction cost per year is $81,300, and it will be paid off in 2040. Canal system, they also pay the federal government O&M on 3 dams for about $46,000 per year. So their contract with reclamation The Superior Reclamation has required us to set aside $13,500 per year for emergency repairs. Last year in 21, the annual payment jumped to $81,000 per year. And the Frenchman also has a $5 per acre user's fee for federal contract obligation. Then they pay $4.25 per inch for water allocation. The irrigation district infrastructure is 70 years old and needs some attention. Every 5 years, Reclamation does a complete inspection of our projects and makes repair recommendations. And so what LB 1074, what the amendment we're talking about today does, this pays that above and beyond, if you will. The things that they've been working on that now there's costs in there that they're just not able to come up with. They're not able to fund that. And this makes a significant improvement, adjustment, if you will, to their system to make it
1
more
minute.
efficient, to make it more user-friendly in a sense, especially if we go into the Rubicon systems, or there's another company, I'm sorry, I forget the name of that company, but they use. Those systems make a huge difference and moves more water downstream. So there's more users for that. And again, it's our farmers that are out there that are irrigating. In some of these places, this is the only water they have. They can't drill, they can't put a well in because there's no groundwater for them. It's not there, not enough for irrigation. So this is the only systems that they have to exist. And we saw that, if you remember, when the canal collapsed in 19, it was a disaster out in western Nebraska because of irrigation water wasn't there. And we were looking at a complete crop loss out there. These systems are pretty integral to these areas of the state. Eastern side of the state and some of the central side of the state, we're pretty fortunate because we do have water that we can access. Not all areas, but a lot
Time,
of areas.
Senator. Thank you, Senator Bostoman. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm learning a lot about irrigation districts. I'm learning a lot about irrigation. Would Senator Erdman yield to a question?
Senator Erdman, would you yield?
I'd be glad to.
Senator Erdman, can you tell me about the Laramie Canal and tell me where's the construction at on that?
On the tunnel?
Yes.
Okay. The tunnel collapsed a couple of years ago, Senator, and they ran out of water in the middle of July. And then that winter, they went in and reinforced it, and they could run about 3/4, maybe 8/10 of the normal flow. And they've went in and done some more work on that second tunnel, the one that collapsed. And they're still at about that stage. But the goal is to repair those long-term. Last week, the state of Wyoming, I contacted a senator over there that her and I were working on this. They approved their $23.1 million for tunnel repairs, and our half is 23.1, and that's in the budget as well.
So is the crisis over? There's water flowing?
The water was flowing, but not at full capacity.
So we have to continue to support it until it gets to full capacity.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Erdman. I just want us to remember that when we talk about the ERA funds, when that bill comes up, because we have to fully support it until we're all the way over the crisis, and we're not all the way there. But I'm still learning about irrigation districts. So I still want to talk to you, Senator Erdman. I didn't tell me, does this money go to the irrigation districts themselves? Because I've heard that many of these irrigation systems are actually paid for by the farmers, and many of them are actually on loans and they're paying back the loan. How do you know how that's going to work out?
The money will go directly to the irrigation district to pay for the cost of the replacement of the items they're replacing. It's not going to go to the farmers.
Well, Senator Bostoman yield to a couple questions.
Senator Bostoman, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Bostoman, I was under the impression from some testimony where I read, and I think me and you had a conversation, that some of these farmers have loans out on their property as far as some of this irrigation to maintain and support. Will they be reimbursed anything?
This goes as a grant program that's run through DNR that goes out to the irrigation districts or surface water irrigators. So
can maybe you or Senator Erdman can tell me how the canal that we potentially will build, how the Laramie project, and like how does all of this connect? Is it all like connected or are they independent? Senator Erdman?
They're two separate projects here, Senator. Senator
Correct. Are they
Bosselman-
connected though? Like, does the irrigation districts feed off of?
No.
Okay.
The Fort Laramie, Gearing Fort Laramie district is the one that had the tunnel collapse, and that runs on the south side of Scotts Bluff and goes into the Gearing Valley south of Scotts Bluff. That is a separate district. Then the other districts all either come off of the North Platte River or are picked up at the Wyoming line, where they pick up the water to go through canal system in the northern part of Morrill County and Scotts Bluff County. So it's two separate things. Senator Bosselman's bill is for those districts that are not included in the tunnel collapse.
And do you feel that we need a full 50 million this year, or can we spread it out over a couple years?
I think it's a one-time contribution, one-time spend.
1 minute.
50 million.
Would you support 25 and 25, or you think we can actually spend all this money immediately?
I think that would probably be a question for Senator Bosselman. He has all the information from those irrigation districts, but he may be able to answer that better than I did.
Senator Bosselman, will you yield to a question?
Senator Bostman, would you yield?
Yes,
You heard the question. Could you help me with that?
sure. It's 30 million the first year and 20 million the second year.
Thank you. Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne, Senator Erdman, and Senator Bostman. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, in January and late January, I criticized Senator Flood for having a campaign event out in the rotunda. I think that this is a completely inappropriate use of the Capitol. And today I see Chuck Herbster has had an event out in the rotunda just like an hour ago. And that must be where the Lieutenant Governor went when he left the chair. Several of our colleagues were there, Senator Halloran, Senator Breezy, going out into the rotunda for a campaign rally in the middle of the legislative session, in the middle of the day, when the people of Nebraska are paying us to be here to do their business. It is vulgar. It is a mockery of the democratic institution that this place is supposed to represent. And colleagues, I think that we need to look seriously at a rule to prevent campaigning in this building, because it is ethically bankrupt, it's embarrassing, and it's shameful to this institution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, I thank everybody for talking about this and educating me further about the subject. And there was some of the exchange there that was helpful and informative. And talking about, again, the value proposition purely, the idea of $50 million with only a 10% match from the individuals is, that's a question. And again, you recognize the cost borne and how important this is. And this is a lifeblood for these organizations and for these folks out there. And I think Senator Wayne addressed the canal, or the Laramie Canal out there, and I think, I don't have it handy, but there's an ARPA appropriation in that proposed ARPA budget that would also go to help pay for that project. And so this is, again, a question of really just the role of the state of Nebraska in these situations. And is this the right way to do it? Is this the best use of our funds? And I know there was a conversation about loan forgiveness, loan assurities, how these projects are being paid for. Those are good questions. Is this the right way to structure this? But the one question, and I think Senator Friesen was addressing this and talking about charging an appropriate cost to the users. This is a user fee-based organizations, and making sure you have the appropriate maintenance fund. You're charging enough over the life of a 70-year, apparently, piece of infrastructure to be able to replace it on whatever it is the regular scale that it should be replaced. And that, I was thinking about that, reminded me of, there was a story within the last year about condo associations nationally, and with particularity, the one, I think it was somewhere in Florida, that the building actually had a catastrophic and tragic collapse. And one of the reasons for that was they were not funding appropriately the maintenance fund in that. And that had to do with the fact, and this happens in a lot of places, where you artificially keep the fees low, lower than would be necessary to appropriately maintain and run this organization, which is the obligation of those running it. And they keep the fees low, basically as sort of like a shell game, pretending like everything's okay and that we're not going to need to do this. And so that obviously is that's a question a lot of people have about a lot of things. Is like when we talk about how to run a government, we have fixed fees, fixed costs for the government that we must meet and service, and then we have other wants, needs on the side as well, and so we have an obligation to make sure that we set the rates, being taxes, at the appropriate amount to make sure that we fund the essential functions of government. And sometimes we set them too low, sometimes they set them too high, but the obligation is to make sure that you are asking of those that you are servicing to fund the full scope, which is the current operation, being in this case the water, but also the ongoing maintenance and replacement costs. And so are we as the state in this particular instance stepping in more generously than is probably necessary to help replace pieces of equipment that maybe should have been replaced over the 70-year life, or should have been, the money should have been accumulated over that life to make sure it is paid for. And so those are questions I think that are important to consider, to answer while we consider this. And of course, as always, is this the right use of $50 million, $25 million under this amendment for the state budget in lieu of all the other things we could have done with that? Are we getting the return on investment that we need and expect on this sort of expenditure? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry for the delay there. I want to mention a little bit about when we had the hearing on this bill, and the people who understand and know about water districts came in, and I asked the question, how many of these irrigation districts are in my district or in Western Nebraska? And I had guessed 29, and I think the real answer was 30. So most of these irrigation districts that this money would apply for are in either my district or Senator Stinner's district. That is a significant number. And then when you get past McConaughey, then I think there's a couple past McConaughey, but most of them are in my district. I've had conversations with several of these board members that are on these ditch boards, irrigation district boards, about this specific bill, and they don't believe that they would be able to charge enough per acre on O&M charges to make this up. I'll give you an example. In Whitney, Nebraska, Whitney is a small community between Crawford and Chadron, and there's a reservoir there, Whitney Reservoir, and they have an irrigation district that irrigates about 700 acres on the other side of a creek. And so they go underneath the creek with a flume or a three-foot pipe, and that pipe's been there for nearly 100 years and it's rusting out and needs to be replaced. So their original bid to repair the pipe was around $900,000. And as time goes by, every time they get a bid, it's higher because of the material costs are going up. And so if they were going to replace that flume, that pipe, at $1 million total cost or more, and they divided that up on the 700 acres, it would be exorbitant on how much they would pay, and so those acres may just go dry. And so those farmers on that side of the creek would not be able to irrigate, And I would assume that ground is probably worth $4,000 an acre today. And so it's probably assessed at 2,500 to 3,000, which they're paying property tax on. And so if that dries up, that will become dry land, and the assessed value will probably somewhere in the $600 or $700 range or less. And so it's a pretty significant deal for these small districts to be able to recoup the expense of changing that pipe and others. And I think Senator Bosman pretty much explained what each district had and what the repercussions of not being able to do that would be. So those are the issues that we're facing. And so I think it's vital that we stay at the $50 million. And I appreciate the discussion today. And I hope that surface irrigation is more well or better understood than it was before we started. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Bostelman, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just want to go back on a couple things, since it looks like I'll be the last one speaking in the queue before it goes to Senator Wayne. And the thing is as we looked at this project, it doesn't just benefit those individuals who live out in western Nebraska who have no other source of water. So now you're talking economic impact in those areas, but also benefits all of us across the state of Nebraska. I have a map here. It's pretty hard to read or to see. But it is significant where those areas are out west, where there just is not any other water source for them. So if we dry up this water source, if this water source goes away, if we don't improve upon it, make it more efficient, then then those farmers aren't gonna be able to raise crop. What's that gonna do that economy to those small towns out west? We talk about giving money to one side of the state or the other. I don't know, and maybe Senator Erdman could yield to a question.
Senator Erdman,
would you yield?
Would you yield?
Yes.
Hey, Senator Erdman, do you know, has there been any significant funding go out to this part of the state for help in this area or anything similar to that? Do we have anything out there that's doing a lot of economic development on?
I think they've made applications for the Water Sustainability Fund, but I'm not sure how many of those have been granted.
So really, this is the only opportunity they have to do something. The only opportunity the states had to actually do anything out in the western part of the state.
That's correct. Senator Bosman, for the 6 years that I've been here, I have had a conversation with some of those irrigation districts almost every year about helping them replace some of their infrastructure.
I understand that, and I understand this has been looked at for a couple years. I think previously Senator Hughes had something that he looked at a couple years ago, and then we're just following up because especially once we had the Fort Laramie Gearing collapse, that just really shown the reason why we really need to take a look at these systems to make sure that we can provide the water where it's needed. It's not like it's something that's not needed. It's not a luxury out there. This is something that you have to have in order to raise those crops. You have to have these. And we're talking a third, ask is a third of what they have identified of what the need is. So with that, it's broken out in 2 years, 30 million this year, 20 million next year. How would that help the district out there, Senator?
Well, I think it'd be a tremendous asset for them to have that, especially, say, for example, the one example I gave you at Whitney, if they could draw some of these funds to accomplish that, those 700 acres may be irrigated, and opposed to if they don't get it, they may not get irrigation there. So it is a significant thing, and it's a long ways from Lincoln, but we would sure appreciate some help.
That's something I think that I think we need to realize is this is something that they have an opportunity that they can do themselves. They really need this assistance in order to make those changes to benefit, again, all across the state, wildlife, people, cities, businesses. It is something significant that we need to do, and I would appreciate continued support. I would say a red on floor amendment 129. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bostelman and Senator Erdman. Seeing no one in the queue, Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close on floor amendment 129.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I don't know about you. I would love to be doing legal work right now and making more than less than the minimum wage that I make when we're here at being senators. But I think it's very important. I learned a lot. I'm on natural resources, but I learned a lot about irrigation districts. Learned a little bit about the healthcare cash fund, and I think when we're appropriating a lot of money, we should know what we're appropriating. So I appreciate the discussion. I think it was a great discussion. I have one more amendment that I may or may not drop, depending on time. And with that, I'll withdraw FA 129.
FA 129 is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Before we proceed, Mr. President, thank you. Enrollment and Review Reports Legislative Bill 1102, 1102A, 283, 779, 808, 1092, and 1204, all the select files, some having enrollment and review amendments. Senator Moorfeld, an amendment to 1011 and to 1014. Senator Wayne, an amendment to 1013. New resolutions, LR 332 by Senator Boster will be laid over, and 333 is an interim study resolution introduced by Senator McDonald. Mr. President, Senator Friesen, you have the next amendment, Senator. AM 2348.
Senator Friesen, you're recognized to open on AM 2348.
Thank you, Mr. President. So what this bill did was completely strike the section that we were just talking about. And so I think everybody has pretty well discussed that enough that we know where the money is going, why it's going, where it's going. And we've all learned a little bit more about surface groundwater irrigation. And so I will withdraw this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
That amendment is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk.
I'm going to make it private. That's okay. Mr. President, next amendment, Senator Wayne, AM 2382.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on AM 2382.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is actually, I'm totally confused by this section of the bill. So if you turn to page 14, and I don't know if Senator Stenner or Senator Wishart or somebody can walk me through this. If you turn to page 14, lines 14 through 16, it says the department may enter into a contract with a Nebraska-based entity, nonprofit entity, for the purposes of carrying out any or all provisions of section 81-1210.01 to 81-1210.03. Okay, that makes sense. Then if you go down to same page, line 27 to 30, it says the Department of Economic Development or any entity in which the department contracts for such purpose may use up to 5% of any appropriation to carry out sections 81-1210.01 to 81-1210.03 for the administrative services. Where I'm confused is why are we putting a limitation of 5%, which I do agree with, because my amendment actually adds the 5% limitation to line 14 through 16, but I'm just not sure why there's a 5% limitation on one and a 5% limitation on the other. And I can't tell if the departments are the same departments. Then these are two conflicting different languages for the same section of law. So my amendment just clarifies and keeps it the same for both of them, saying we're going to cap them both at 5% for administration purposes. So I don't know whose bill this is, but if somebody can explain on the mic the difference, or okay. And with that, can you talk for a little bit? Okay. All right. If anybody can punch in and help me explain why there's two different provisions for the same section of law. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Debate is now open. Senator Flood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I believe what Senator Wayne is questioning is the LB 1167 language that was included in the budget by the Appropriations Committee. Let me set the stage for you. So we have, obviously, through this COVID process, seen a massive disruption in our workforce. A number of our older workers did not return to the workforce, and we have north of 60,000 open jobs in the state of Nebraska, and we don't have anybody to fill a lot of those jobs. Our unemployment rate is at the lowest point in the history of the United States as a singular sovereign state. We are the lowest in unemployment. So we find ourselves at an intersection of problems and jobs. And the problem is that we don't have enough people to fill the jobs. And so what we have worked together with the Nebraska State Chamber, the Omaha Chamber, the Lincoln Chamber, businesses across the state, industry leaders, nonprofit groups, we have met constantly over the summer. They have met a lot, and they have basically asked the question, what's the best way forward? When I was here probably 12 years ago, we started a program called Intern Nebraska, which helps companies employ students that are either in their studying at the university or in their high school experience. And the company actually has the funds to bring in more interns and train more people. The idea here is to connect students with jobs in Nebraska before they leave the state. It happens in Omaha all the time. All of these really bright Nebraska students, and they're interested in vocational work. They're interested in becoming mechanics. They're interested in working in a field that requires a 4-year degree. They leave the state. We don't get them back. The research says that if you lose somebody at age 25, they're not coming back. And so our job is to find that soon-to-be college graduate or that high school graduate that wants to work in the great state of Nebraska, and then link that student with a job. And LB 1167 really provides, initially was a proposal to put $50 million into the Intern Nebraska program. And the idea was that with that kind of influx of cash, that the state of Nebraska would go out, it would put an RFP out there to any organization that would match that up to $5 million. And the Appropriations Committee ultimately committed $20 million to that out of general funds. I need to really understand what Senator Wayne's objection is, and I think he's referencing that in the highlighted areas. He gave me his bill here. It says on page 14, line 27, the Department of Economic Development or any entity with which the department contracts for such purpose may use up to 5% of any appropriation to carry out these sections for administrative purposes. And then on page 15, line 15, it says the legislature finds that the development of a public-private partnership facility in conjunction with the U.S. Strategic Command will enhance. Okay, so that's a different section. I don't think he intended that to be there. So may I ask Senator Wayne a question?
Senator Wayne, would you yield?
Yes.
Can you tell me what your amendment does here?
All my amendment does is take the exact same language from 27 to 30 and put it from 14, well, it'll probably be now 17, move it down a line. I'm just mimicking the 5% language because I'm not sure what the difference is.
Okay, so help me. I don't have the benefit of having that pulled right up here, and I don't have it on the gadget, but can you explain you want to apply it from where and put it to where? Where's the language coming from?
The language is coming from the lines 27 through 30, which limits the contract, if we contract or DED, can only use up to 5% for administration services. But the language above that is just wide open, saying that we can contract it out. So to me, there's conflicting languages. Is it 5% or is it any and all?
I'll have to defer to the opinion of the Appropriations Committee. I think there's value. Obviously, I share with you, Senator Wayne, in having a 5% administrative cap on the fees so that we can make sure that as much money gets out across the state as possible. I'll defer to the Appropriations Committee staff and members of the Appropriations Committee on the actual language, and I'll take a look at it myself. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood and Senator Wayne. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, again, thank you to Senator Wayne for kind of giving us a chance to talk about this. This was another one I was curious about and have been trying to digest. And so I appreciate Senator Flood giving us the highlights of the program. And I was just sitting here doing the math and looking at this. So there's a $20 million appropriation here. And if I'm reading it right, the maximum grant award per internship is $7,500, which essentially means this would create a program for about 2,600 Nebraskans. And it includes things like tuition reimbursement for courses at institutions of higher education, internship housing, transportation expenses, internship administrative and recruitment costs. And it's for businesses of less than 50 full-time equivalent employees. So again, to put this in the context we're talking about is the value to Nebraska, the return on investment. Senator Flood did a nice job of explaining the rationale, the justification, basically getting people to get involved in the workforce here, getting that educational experience, the real world employment experience are valuable things. And if you get people to have jobs here, they're more likely to stay here. And so that does have a value. And obviously these $20 million would be, I think, so there's a matching fund part. I don't quite see that here, but I'm sure Senator Flood was correct about that. It might be on a different page, but basically, we've gotten to a point in our society where a lot of interns is synonymous with free or very cheap labor, and it's lost its meaning, which an internship used to be an educational opportunity for someone to get real world work experience in a field that they were interested in, maybe try out a field and see if they wanted to work in that employer, see if they wanted to work in that field, see if they wanted to work in that community. And so it was an opportunity for people. And so then the student, the intern, got value out of it in those sorts of ways. And so that we've started making it so everybody's taking advantage. A lot of people have taken advantage of that. So I think this is an opportunity to write that sort of system and maybe get more people into taking advantage of these type of programs. And I think Senator Flood is probably correct that if young people, college students, work in Nebraska at these smaller employers, they're going to be more likely to stay here. When I went to school, I had to go to a different city for an internship. I didn't end up staying there, but I think a number of people did stay in the city where they did their internship because they built those workplace connections, even though they would go back to where their school was. So if we can ensure that kids going to UNO and Lincoln can get a job in Nebraska and not have to go to Iowa City or Kansas City or Chicago for their summer internship to get some work experience, they're going to be more likely to stay in Nebraska and work in those fields and professions. So, like I said, it's before, I think, figuring out the cost benefit analysis, what's the return on investment, what are all the other ancillary benefits to things are considerations that I'm trying to consider as I look at all of these and determine whether or not I agree with individual programs and the budget as a whole. And, of course, we have to think about other ways in which we could use this money. And of course, I always go back.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've advocated for using a lot of our funds for housing assistance and rental assistance and healthcare access, things like that. Students getting paid, I think it fits into a category that helps with people staying in school, being able to pay their rent, and having those successes in life and being able to move forward and lift themselves up. So on the face, certainly seems to me like a beneficial program that go forward. As to the question that Senator Wayne is asking, I would generally join him in his amendment. I'm waiting to hear if they've resolved that issue now that they've had some time to talk about it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am going to take just a little bit of time. Some individuals think they can read these two together. So I'm going to let them go ahead and read those two together. I do think you can't. So colleagues, let me just take a step back and talk about what's going on today. If we were making a constitution, I don't think you think we can make a constitution in 8 hours. Probably several months of debate would actually bring us to somewhere where we can have a constitution. What's interesting, the second most important document besides a constitution this body can do is the budget. And in fact, the only thing in our constitution that we have to do is our budget. So I don't think and actually this year we don't have to do it. I don't think anybody on appropriations should think any appropriation bill or appropriations together, the budget, will move in necessarily one day. In fact, if you look at historically, I believe there was one budget that moved in about 4 or 5 hours, and the body got so much heat that never happened again. It typically is a day, day and a half, if not longer, because it literally is the most important document besides our Constitution we really have. Statutes are important, and don't think they're not, but this literally puts money where your mouth is. And the issue I have I have issues with the process, but that's just the nature of the process that I don't blame the Appropriations Committee for this, that we ourselves have set up, all the way from the exec board to Urban Affairs Chair. We just have always done it this way, and so that's the way we do it. And every year since I've been here, there hasn't been one appropriation bill that has sailed through. In fact, our first year went without 33 votes multiple times over Title X. It was just, I've never had appropriation bill go smoothly since I've been here. But my point is at some point we have to make a change. We have to do something different that's better for the body. And I can think of no more important time than like right now, when we have extra dollars that everybody's fighting for. And I don't think it's fair. I don't mean fair as in balancing what the Appropriation Committee did. I just don't think it's fair to the body to leave that on a 9-member committee. That would be essentially leaving on a 9-member committee writing our Constitution. I don't think anybody would necessarily think that's the way we should operate. It would be a floor debate. It would be multiple debates. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And so our budget is important. And for me, and for those who say they want to help, this is that moment where we get uncomfortable. This is that moment on the budget where we say, does the budget reflect what we want to happen in Nebraska? And for me, it doesn't at this point. Now, we can talk about down the road or what ARPA might look like, but that's not what we're voting on today. What we are voting on today is the budget. The budget before us, and particularly this bill about creating new cash funds. And by creating new cash funds and some appropriation dollars, I'm still trying to figure out why the trail has cash in it in this bill and other bills don't. That's beyond my pay. But regardless, this is part of our budgeting process. And the question is, does the budget today reflect Nebraska's values? And for me, the community that I represent is not even shown in this budget, or this bills being incorporated in cash fund transfers. I think generally when we look at Medicare and Medicaid and provider rates, I'm good with that. But when I look at the total of over 500 million in cash transfers, I'm sorry, it's just not representing what I believe we should be doing for certain areas of our community.
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. as I listened to this bill in our hearing, and I listened to what Senator Flood wanted to accomplish with this bill, I believe that this bill will be an ongoing appropriation. It was announced in the hearing by Senator Flood that this was a one-time appropriations, but I will tell you that this will be a raving success. And at the end of 2 years, there's no way that we can let this stop. And I'm not saying that I'm opposed to this bill, but I just want to make you aware of the fact that this very well could be an ongoing obligation. And so I was wondering if Senator Flood would yield to a question.
Senator Clements, would you yield?
Senator Flood.
Excuse me, Senator Flood, would you yield?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood. Senator Flood, did you see the original fiscal note for this bill?
I'm sure I did. I can't specifically recall it. I
Okay,
know
let me just get to my point. My point is, they said it was going to be 10 FTEs to run this program. 10. You have a problem with that?
Well, one of the reasons that I really support this bill is that we give the department the ability to contract out through an RFP with a third party, and we cap the expense at 5% of the total amount. So I think that limits certainly the number of people. The benefit of using an RFP would be to get this out of state government, so we didn't create those positions and then
Right.
have to deal with them, because I really do think it is a one-time deal.
Yeah, and that's your opinion. I understand that, and I appreciate that. And I have mine, so we'll see what happens in 2 years. But
That's not the first time.
10 people. Yeah, I understand. 10 people is a lot of people. And so the appropriation committee has cut that back to 20 million instead of 50. So I would make the assumption that they're probably going to consider still having 10 people.
Well, I hope there are thousands of young people that end up with jobs in this state. And I think that capping it at 5% is reasonable. It keeps the focus on what the mission is, and that is to get these jobs out into the community.
Yeah, well, those 10 people, according to that fiscal note, would be more than the 5%. So thank you. Thank you for answering the question. So as we proceed here, Senator Wayne had talked about the first year we were here and the way we adopted that budget. And that was my first experience. And as we got down to the end of that budget, I concluded from my back of the envelope math that we were out of sync about $250 million. And so I introduced an amendment to the budget to adopt the previous year's budget, which was about $250 million less than the budget that we brought to the floor. It came up late evening in May, and the speaker went to the people who had their lights on and had them turn their lights off. And I got 19 votes. Needed 25, got 19. We adjourned. In October of that year, the forecasting board met and said, we are out of balance, 238 million.
1 minute.
And it wasn't because I had ESPN and I could tell what was going to happen. It's because I knew what was happening in agriculture and what was going to happen to the economy. And so Senator Wayne is right. We should take some time to understand what this budget means and what it's going to mean for the future. So taking time to talk about these things is not all bad. But one of the things that concerns me about the ARPA money is to distribute that money is going to be $25 million, $25 million associated with the distribution of that. In the Appropriations Committee, I volunteered to do it for $5 million. And Senator McDonald left me one, and he said he'd do it for $4.5 million. But think about that a minute, if you would. $25 million to distribute the money. If you don't think that's exorbitant, come and talk to me and explain to me why you think $25 million is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman and Senator Flood. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. The more I keep reading this is what happens when you keep reading these two sections on page 14. You just lawyer it to death. And so in 14 through 16, they say the department may enter into a contract with a Nebraska-based nonprofit entity for the purpose of carrying out any or all of said provisions. Then through 27 through 30, it says the Department of Economic or any entity with which the department contracts for such purpose. It didn't use the same language as nonprofit entity. So to me, that does conflict because any entity and qualifying words of nonprofit entity are two different things. But here's my real problem with the overall program now that I'm thinking about it. Why aren't companies doing this? Why aren't companies who need people going to colleges, recruiting interns, and just sending their name and what they're doing to the department to get reimbursed? Why do we have to have a nonprofit be the go-between? If companies in Nebraska are hurting for so many people to be there, then why aren't companies engaging in the workforce they're trying to hire? I know I'm making too much logical sense right now, so I know it's late, but let's just think about this. If a law firm, Wayne Law, is looking to expand their attorneys, I'm going to Creighton or UNL, and I'm going to look for clerks. So I'm going to hire clerks, and if I know I can get reimbursed by the Department of Labor or whoever, or DED, why wouldn't I just send the hours they work to the government to get reimbursed? Why do I have to go to a nonprofit? Will Senator Flood yield to a question?
Senator Flood, would you yield?
Yes.
So I just proposed a hypothetical. I'm not sure if you were listening. I need to repeat that. What are your thoughts on why we need a go-between for companies to go out and recruit and hire people?
Well, I think workforce development looks different in different parts of the state with different communities in the state and different sub-communities within larger communities like yours. And I think at the end of the day, the state chamber who brought this to me initially, working with the partners from the Lincoln Chamber and the Omaha Chamber, felt that this was too much of one-time money for the Department of Economic Development to immediately ramp up, that the DED folks would have the option, if they felt that way, under whatever administration, to put out an RFP and have different groups across the state that show interest that want. There's also a $5 million match, I believe. So whatever organization puts into this, they have to donate to the same cause, $5 million. And so the idea is to match money out there from other organizations. And if I may, on your time, I'll tell you what we're doing in Norfolk to accomplish things
Sure,
like this.
you can push your buttons and you'll be back sometime. That'd be great.
What I would say is that one of the problems we have in rural counties is that between 20 and 50% of persons aged 20 to 24 leave rural counties, and the net migration tables show that they're moving to other places. And so we're trying to put our communities in between that student, whether it's college or high school, and what they may consider as another option, like a Kansas City or a Denver, an Austin or Boston. And we're trying to improve the quality of life in our community. And so we get people to go to Wayne State for 3 years, and then their fourth year, they move and live and work in downtown Norfolk, and they would be getting an education at the same time that they're actually working in a business full-time for credit, so that when they graduate in May, they actually have a job there and they're around other people their age. And one of the challenges we've had with 22-year-olds specifically is that when they're in a rural community, there aren't as many 22-year-olds for them to be around, and they oftentimes leave your community looking for their mate. So that's biology and economic development and workforce development wrapped up in one big answer for you. But I think it's complicated, and
Time,
that's why
Senator.
I'm for this.
Thank you, Senator Flood and Senator Wayne. Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll yield my time to Senator Wayne.
Senator Wayne yielded 4 minutes 55.
There was no way that took 5 seconds for him to yield. Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. But no, I'm really thinking about this. The more I keep thinking about this and the more I keep thinking about this process, Senator Flood, the problem is rural Nebraska is no different than North and South Omaha when it comes to wage internships, employment gaps, and employment rates. What this bill actually says, and it gave me like a second wind, what this bill actually says is you have to be enrolled full time. So that means employers know where these individuals are. They're not just somewhere on a farm, not employed, in order to be, or not in a school. In order to qualify for this program, they have to be enrolled. So I'm still not understanding why we are setting aside $20 million for a nonprofit to go do what the employer should be doing already. The employer should be saying, I need a workforce. I need to grow Nucor. I need to grow Valmont. And if that needs to happen, I have to go to where the students are, whether in high school or in college. And if they're at a community college, we got so many navigators and so many other things going. I don't know how we're not already connecting this and why we need another nonprofit to do this. Let's think about that. If Hawkins Construction needs more carpenters, they're going to Metro Community College to try to get those carpenters. They don't need a nonprofit to say, hey, find me people who are in school full time to bring to our workforce. We know where they're at. They're in school full time. So the nonprofit's going to get the money, go to the school and say, hey, here's an employer who needs you. I mean, this sounds like $20 million that can go to property tax relief or $20 million that can go to help increase TIOSA. But this $20 million does not, I guess I really don't understand what we're truly doing here when the employment gap is on the employers to fill. And I'm pretty sure those employers would love to take that check, which is what's going to happen anyway. Per the program, the employer gets reimbursed, or the intern gets paid actually through this. So why not just reimburse the employer? Less overhead, less costs, less money that we have to deal with when it comes to another organization's being credited. And I do agree with Senator Erdman. This is not a one-time funding project, because based on population growth, based on job growth that we're seeing in Nebraska, there is always going to be an employment gap where there is going to be a need for interns. So we really need to think about this. And I know a lot of people aren't necessarily listening and engaged in this, but I think at the end of the day, tell me why we need a nonprofit to fill this gap. And I would gladly like to have that dialogue on why we need that when an employer is capable. Every law firm does that. And it's not about geographical location. I'm sure there are internships and partnerships right now with high schools. I know they are in Omaha Public Schools. I know there is in Grand Island. I know there is in Sydney. And I know all the community colleges have intern programs where they have career fairs, where all of them come in and see each other and figure out where they're going to go.
1 minute.
So why do we need some in-between person to connect them with employers when employers are the ones who are already doing it anyway? Maybe I'm not making sense. Maybe it's late and I haven't had enough coffee, but that just seemed like a way that I just think we save some money. I could be wrong, but I doubt it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the balance of my time to Senator Wayne.
Senator Wayne, you're yielded 4 minutes 53.
Will Senator Friesen yield to a question?
Senator Friesen, would you yield?
Yes, I would.
Senator Friesen, you and I have had these conversations quite a bit about this unemployment rate and the maybe employees are not paying as much as they should. And I don't know if you heard me what I was talking about, but I'm genuinely looking for some feedback on what I said just a little bit ago.
Well, I mean, the internship program and how companies, to me, if you're a good company and you're out looking for good employees, you're going to have an internship program, because you can get those kids right out of high school to come in and you can pick the cream of the crop, so to speak, get rid of the rest of them. Internship programs they're great for a business. I think they're fantastic, but it lets a business really sort through some people and be able to hire the best of the best.
Thank you. So again, I have in every moment throughout this process had to justify multiple times, and I said it from the beginning, anything over a certain amount, we got to justify today, and that's where we're at. So I just think maybe, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I just think maybe we should rely on the private market to figure out this answer. And nobody's really told me what the nonprofit does that's different than what a corporation can do. That's all I'm trying to figure out. I was looking for a response.
I guess I don't understand either the long path here, because we've given tax credits and things to employers to hire people also. I mean, this is just a different way of doing it, I guess. I'm not familiar with the bill enough that I could answer that, but to me, there's numerous ways of going about it. I don't know whether a nonprofit has to be involved or not.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne and Senator Friesen. Senator Wishart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the amendment and in strong support of the bill that was brought by Senator Flood. So to answer a couple of questions that have been introduced to this floor debate, first of all, we are not creating a new program. Senator Flood is not creating a new program. Intern Nebraska is a program that has existed for many years. It was actually a pretty sleepy program until Senator Flood and his leadership looked at it and recognized the benefits that would come to our state with revitalizing this program. So what was done is we made sure to expand it to include high school students. It's really important, especially in rural areas, that high school students get access to businesses in their community, because if they leave and go to college, they will have potentially that anchor to come back to in those connections. Secondly, the funding that was created and is going into either Department of Economic Development, which, by the way, again, this fund already exists. What this bill does is allows for the Department of Economic Development to contract with a nonprofit to be a pass-through, so that stipends for interns who are involved in this program, so stipends for the high school students and the college students, run through this and are administered by this nonprofit. So the Department of Economic Development does not have to own this program in terms of the administration. And as we've discussed with Senator Wayne's amendment, what we have done in Senator Flood's legislation is restrict the amount that nonprofit can use to 5% of that 20 million for the administrative overhead. I want to step back and say that one of these statistics that has stuck in my head for many years now was one that I heard at an Aging Nebraska breakfast about 4 years ago, where the speaker said that the way that our population trajectory in Nebraska is going is that by 2030, we will have more people 65 and older in our state than 18 and younger. Think about that. We will have more people leaving our workforce than entering our workforce. And you know, one of the conversations and dialogues that really struck me when we were talking about the canal is the amount of conversations that went on about how much Colorado's population is exploding on the Front Range. We're the opposite, colleagues. We're losing young people every single day. And so yes, when we're looking at workforce and we're looking at solutions, and Senator Flood has the courage to take a sleepy program and revitalize it and make it actually work creatively, we're going to include that in our budget. That's a priority. A priority is changing the trajectory of this state's population. We need to be doing that. We should have done it 10 years ago. This bill helps us move in that direction. And finally, as somebody who previously worked for over 5 years in the after-school and summer learning space, I will tell you, not every kid wants to go out for sports. As much as I love athletics, not every kid wants to go out for sports. This bill brings back the summer jobs program. It gives young kids in high school in particular something to do that is engaging with their life, where they're engaging with other meaningful adult relationships and building a career for themselves in high school. I cannot imagine why someone would not want to support a bill that funds stipends for young people to get job experience. That's workforce development, and it's after school. So I encourage you all to support the underlying bill that's incorporated into AM 2000, and I encourage you to support LB 1012. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Flood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, members. A couple of quick comments. The language that you're looking at that Senator Wayne has identified is the same approach and identical to what we do with the Business Innovation Act, where the state of Nebraska contracts with outfits like Invest Nebraska. And that has been wildly successful. So successful that this body greatly increased the amount of money we're spending in the Business Innovation Act. Senator Wishart is right. I will tell you my experience with workforce development, and workforce development can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but let me tell you, this bill has everything to do with every community that wants to get engaged. That includes North Omaha, that includes South Omaha. I don't serve in this legislature, and neither do you, to help one specific area of the state solely. And I want to make sure that the people in North and South Omaha know that there are projects that will probably likely be funded in your area. The Omaha Chamber of Commerce is engaged here. The Makerspace effort, Millwork Commons, which is in a portion of the downtown, north downtown area, has been an idol for people in workforce development as to how they've put it together and what they've done. But I'll tell you how I got here. I got here by giving my own time, starting in 2018, spending pretty much, I'd say 25 to 40% of my time since January 1 of 2018 on trying to figure out different ways to make a section of Nebraska grow. And at the end of the day, it's about figuring ways to get those young people to stay in rural communities. Senator Aguilar is doing the same thing. This money could be used by St. Francis Hospital to expose Latinas and Latinos to the health professions, where they sorely need more nurses, CNAs, doctors, paramedics. St. Francis Hospital in Grand Island specifically is looking at this. The community of Grand Island is looking at this to take advantage of exposing Latinos to this program. They are excited about it. How would I use this program? I would use this program to get college students to live their fourth year of college in my hometown and get them jobs so that they start working. And then when they graduate, they have a place with a job offer. That's what we want. You can stand up here and throw arrows at it. You can stand up and ask questions. You can stand up and question it, which is your right, and I appreciate it. But let's not say this is for one town or another. Let's not suggest this isn't for North Omaha or South Omaha. This is for anybody that wants to put a plan together to solve a problem, because workforce development is the #1 problem long-term facing our state as our workforce gets older. If not this, then what? Is it go set up a booth at a career fair? We're all doing it. I've done it. I'm trying to hire. We've got to go get these pages here. How many of them will have options outside of the state of Nebraska? How many of them know what kinds of jobs we have in the state of Nebraska? We need to intentionally put ourselves in front of them and say, oh, by the way, did you know Nelnet has this opportunity? Oh, by the way, did you know this business in North Omaha or South Omaha has this opportunity? As someone who runs a broadcasting company, I will tell you, I am really trying to find Spanish-speaking announcers and salespeople and production assistants, people that understand the language. Do you know how many of them are in broadcasting programs? Almost zero. So what do we have to do? We have to figure out a way to expose them to the business, to help them get an education, and give them a job to try it out, to see if we spark something inside of somebody that says, I can do this and I can see something else. Do you know how many young people in Schuyler think this is an option for them? Do you know what the two biggest jobs are for kids in Schuyler? Meat cutting. Yes, meat cutting and teachers, because those are the only two professions they intersect with. So if you want that to be the only options for the kids at Schuyler Central or Schuyler Central, that's fine. But this program steps in the between that student and the rest of the world and says, how about this? How about business finance? How about this in sales? That's what this does. So let's have a conversation about it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood. Senator Coulterman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, that's a tough act to follow, but I concur 100% with Senator Flood. I support LB 1012 and AM 2000, and I'm going to vote against AM 2382 unless it gets pulled. I decided to talk on this. I don't talk a lot on the mic, but I wanted to talk on this because it does affect our future. In Seward, Nebraska, in my district, the 24th district, we have Concordia University, we have York College in York, we have Southeast Community College in Lincoln and Milford. All of those institutions use these internships and they promote them. They gladly promote them. And you know why? Because it keeps the young people here. It's a great way to work. But not only the institutions that are helping train these kids, but also in my area, we've got some of the best seed corn companies in the world. We have Syngenta, we have Bayer, we have Corteva. Those are all huge companies. They hire these kids during the summers with the idea that, hey, if they're in agriculture, we're going to keep them in agriculture. We're going to keep them in our state. That's what this is all about. Because if they're here and they're working, who knows, they might find their future spouse. That will keep them here. Finally, I'd just like to tell you a little story about what happened to me last week. I had an intern that came into my office who was working for my local paper. She's actually a sophomore at the University of Nebraska here in Lincoln. And she wanted to interview me, and I said, well, how did you get here? And she said, well, I lived in Kansas. I came back here. I'm living in Lincoln, Nebraska, but I saw this advertisement in Seward from a job fair. I took this job, and she said, I'm loving it. Now, she's at UNL. She works in Seward part-time. She doesn't have to go to Seward because of technology. She's getting paid. She's going to the University of Nebraska. She's getting a degree. And I said, well, I would just encourage you to stay in Nebraska when you graduate. She said, I really like what we have in Nebraska. And so I just think it's important that we continue to enhance these products. This is a great program. It's doing wonders for our state. If it wasn't working, we probably wouldn't have brought this bill back. But it's got a success story behind it. We need to continue to support it. And I would encourage you to vote against AM 2382. And let's advance this aspect of the bill too. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coulterman. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Either works, depending on where you are. I wanted to pipe up and talk about Intern Nebraska as well. My company's benefited from Intern Nebraska since 2013. We've taken advantage of it 6 or 7 or 8 times to hire college students in Omaha to come and work for me. And they've done things ranging from coding and technology development to marketing and online advertising. And but it was a great thing for my business, and it's always been a great thing for my business because it made it easier for me to pay them a competitive wage because my business got reimbursed for part of the money that we used to pay them. So in that way, as a small business owner especially, it was a benefit that I was happy to be able to take advantage of. I found out about it from the Omaha Chamber of Commerce, going to different trainings and events that they would have sharing resources for business owners. But I have a reality check for you colleagues too about how the Inter-Nebraska program works practically in Nebraska. A problem I had with it when I was using it was that my small company of 20 or fewer employees was competing with big companies like First National Bank and big companies like that in Omaha for these Inter-Nebraska grant dollars, where that grant money for the bigger companies wouldn't really go as far as it would for a smaller business like mine. But anyway, another problem that I had with it at the time was that it only applied to college students. And I think that there's something very classist and problematic about that, because having a college degree definitely prepares you differently for the world. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to end up having a job. It just privileges one type of learning over another. And so I'm happy to see that the Inter-Nebraska program has opened up to other types of non-traditional students, high school students, and I think that we need to continue to make these funds available to companies in a more expansive way and allow small businesses to hire the best person for the job, not necessarily a college student. That was a qualm that I had with it a while ago when we were using it. But colleagues, I want to reality check you, because every single employee that I had that I hired because of the Inter-Nebraska program and took advantage of those funds has left Nebraska, 100% of them. They live in Denver, Chicago, New York City, Los Angeles, Shreveport. And colleagues, I'm proud of them because I feel like it's a testament to my success, and it makes me very proud to have been part of their story where they moved upward to something that was better for them, to live in a place that was more aligned with their values, where they felt they could be more successful, and where they had more cultural opportunities as well. You can look at how the landscape of education is changing in Nebraska over the last 15 years. When I started using Inter-Nebraska program, Omaha Code School was just about to graduate its first class of graduates. And this was a really important thing that started in 2014 in Omaha to train people how to code, and they would go on to have great careers as programmers. And they did. It was an extremely, extremely successful program in Omaha. But guess what, colleagues? All the founders of that program and more than 75% of the graduates that I can think of off the top of my head,
1 minute.
they've left Nebraska. They live in San Francisco, LA, Portland, Seattle, Chicago. Incentives for businesses is not what keeps Nebraskans here. Research shows that, studies show that in Nebraska and in other states. And colleagues, my anecdotal experience of using Inter-Nebraska as a business owner for 8 or 9 years shows that. It helped me as a business owner because it cut down on my expenses. There are other benefits that I would prefer to have as a business owner, such as a pool I could pay in for paid leave for my employees, things like that we've discussed and killed. But Inter-Nebraska is not what keeps Nebraskans here. Everyone I've had that used it left. Thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Aguilar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. First, I want to start off by thanking Senator Flood and Senator Wishart for their comments. Their comments pretty much did a good job of selling one of my bills I have coming up, LB 902, the Career Scholarship Program. And the whole purpose and the whole concept behind it, quite simply, is because employers have already tried everything Senator Wayne suggested. They've worked at that, they've tried it, and we still have these young, bright minds in a brain drain situation leaving the state of Nebraska. We've got to do something to stop that. got to be innovative. That's what Senator Flood's bill does. That's what my LB 902 does. We're looking forward to getting this in action. We're going to put it in place in Grand Island and set a model for the rest of the state, North and South Omaha, if you will. Anybody that wants to take advantage of this program can do so and increase their workforce. Keep these bright minds here in Nebraska where they belong. We're looking forward to. I'll also tell you a little bit about the program Senator Flood referred to, which is going to be a partnership between CHI Hospital in Grand Island and Grand Island Public Schools. The public school is going to take over the 8th floor of CHI. It's going to become a virtual classroom. Students will come there if they're going to choose to work in the health field. They will come there and go to school during the day, take their classes there, and eventually work there. They'll go on from there. When they graduate, they'll go to one of the community college or a four-year university, whichever they choose, and then come back to Grand Island. We now have 2 hospitals that we need to fill. We have a terrible healthcare shortage, as everybody does in the state. These are the kind of programs that's going to keep those kids here. We really need to get these things passed and get them into law and working in the great state of Nebraska. If Senator Flood would choose, he can have the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Flood, you're yielded 2 minutes 30, and you're also next in the queue.
Mr. President, I'll just go next to my time, if that's okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate being recognized. I would reiterate here that what a lot of people in this state are working on, I think, is the same thing. What Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney want in their district is economic development. They want opportunities, jobs. And at every corner, as a member of the Revenue Committee, when these opportunities come across in the form of a bill, and Senator McKinney presents what I think is very smart. He's talking about getting coding in our schools. Yes, I think that's great. I think that is something that needs to happen across the state, and it will because of what he's doing. When Senator Wayne comes in and says, hey, we should spend some of this innovation funding on businesses that locate in North Omaha, my position is let's make sure that those people are living in North Omaha, that they're building their business in North Omaha, and that money is going to North Omaha. There's nothing specific in these bills today that directs the money any certain place. And our problem is bigger than 20 million. Our opportunity is way larger than that. And I really believe that ultimately employers are going to get better employees when we increase our pay. The average wage in Madison County is $20 an hour. In Platte County, it's $22 an hour. And when I tell people in my district, I'll say the number one thing we can do for workforce is increase wage, because it is the most attractive to a majority of employees. They really look at that, and if we want to be aggressive, we have to. And I think you're seeing employers across this state increase the hourly wage. I haven't seen any data yet that confirms it, but I hear about nursing homes and so many other people doing this. Let me draw you a direct connect with what the Appropriations Committee is doing in this budget with what the real world implications are. Do you know how many nursing homes are going to close this year in Nebraska? More than you'd care to know about. I've had a call from the nursing homes in my area, and they basically have said at different times, I don't know if we'll be able to make payroll at the end of the month. The workforce shortage is hitting rural Nebraska probably the same way it's hitting urban Nebraska, but we're losing infrastructure. It's happening in every community that has a nursing home, and we have students that have no idea they're interested in the medical field. We can get them a CNA their senior year in high school, and we can introduce them to the patients that are working at the nursing home, and we can hopefully inspire a lifetime of healthcare professionalism from them. I don't think sometimes we realize how unaware of career opportunities high school students really are. And I don't know if you've ever tried to interact with different schools and getting in front of those students and introducing them to different businesses. The schools want to, but they oftentimes don't know where to start. There isn't that connection with business, or there's not that connection with any kind of a program. And it's hard. We have the greatest resource in this state that isn't a natural resource like waters or rivers or the soil. It's the people. People in Battle Creek are some of the best people ever. Their children are going to go the biggest places. We have those same people in North Omaha and South Omaha and South Lincoln and North Lincoln, in Grand Island, in Sydney, in Kearney, in Crawford. We have to connect them with jobs. And this is an effort funded by the state that complements private funding that connects the student with the opportunity. I think, in my personal opinion, we should focus less on athletic practices in the summer and more on getting jobs. I think kids should work. I started working at 15. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. I think it is the best thing that could happen to a lot of people. Get a job. We've got them. Put kids to work. Get them opportunities. Get some of the school athletic stuff out of the way and pay them. Get them some money in their pocket so that they appreciate that other people appreciate what they're doing and what they're bringing to the labor force. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Pages. I won't take up much time here. I want to just make the point really clear. I have worked so hard my whole adult life as a business owner in Nebraska, as a business leader in Nebraska. I've brought millions of dollars into this state as a small business owner without taking on any debt. I've created dozens of jobs for local people that kept money local in my neighborhood. And I've spent so much time trying to make Nebraska a place where young people want to live, where young people feel like they can have a future. But everything that we do in this body can't, it completely overwhelms everything that good people in all of our communities are trying to do to keep young people here. It doesn't matter how fun my office is or what, nice perks and benefits we have. When my coworkers know, my employees know that we have unprecedented discrimination in this state, when we could ban abortion this year and they wouldn't even be able to get reproductive health care. They wouldn't even be able to terminate a pregnancy before 6 weeks if they wanted to. When we have so many attacks on our teachers and on our schools in this community, colleagues, none of that can trump anything that any business owner can do to make this state a hospitable place for young workers. And trust me, I've tried it and I'm about to give up. I feel like you got to hit a wall and get to a place as a person where you say, I cannot drag this culture anywhere. People are making choices and that's out of my control. And I put in my 20, 25 years to try to make this place better for the next generation, and it didn't work, and I've got to move on. And maybe I'll be the next person going to Portland or Denver or San Francisco or Chicago. Des Moines. Can you imagine moving to Des Moines because it's more progressive than Nebraska? That's the level that we're getting to. So colleagues, please, there are business incentives that are nice. Yay, go us, we helped kids. But don't get it twisted and don't be patting yourselves on the back so much, thinking that you've really done something for kids when the kids are looking at the work that we do in here every day and going, I can't wait to get out of here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. Okay, so I've been listening to the debate about Senator Wayne's amendment and the internship programs, and I've been listening to what Senator Hunt had said about, I'm going to paraphrase here, but about it being for university educated people, and that's eliminating an entire entity of our workforce. And I appreciate the job development and the pipeline that others are trying to create here. But Senator Hunt's point really sticks with me, because we've been talking about how we don't have a workforce in this state. We don't have a workforce. We don't have a workforce. And starting at college is too late. And there are so many people who don't go to college. And we should be starting with that workforce. And I know that there's a bill, because I followed it, and it was LB 1085 that created a high school pipeline where you do engage in activities like the healthcare industry, or future leaders, or future farmers of America. And I would like to see something more comprehensive. If we're going to be building our workforce, I would personally like to see it be more targeted and broader. And I believe that this is Senator Pansy Brooks's bill. And clearly she understands the need for building our workforce right at the right age, where young people are just starting to try different industries out, try different jobs out, and learning who they are. And this is a great opportunity to start building that workforce. And also, if we were to use Senator Pansy Brooks's bill as a model, I think we would also eventually see a correlation in a decrease in the school to prison pipeline, which would save the state even more money. So I'm not entirely opposed to section of 15, I believe it is, lines 14 through 16 on page 14. I'm not opposed to it, but I do think that there's more that we could be doing. And I am opposed to those that are of a lower economic status or ability are always getting put on the back burner in Nebraska and in this legislature. So I hope that we can come to some agreement where we can be more innovative at a younger age. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Pansy Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm rising. This has been a long day of a lot of discussion, a lot of different interesting ideas. Senator Kavanaugh is correct. I did have a bill that I have been very excited about. It's an ARPA bill, LB 1085. That bill, the goal of the bill was to work on the school to workforce pipeline. Every effort that I've made in the past, that others have made in the past, all look at the end of the pipeline. They're looking at how to keep them once they're in college, or once they're try to attract them back to the state. In fact, I've had a veterans bill that has set up a program where the veterans can learn about jobs available here, and also then have opportunities to stay here, rather than having those veterans at SAC move on to another state. So those are areas that I've been very concerned about. Of course, all the LGBTQ plus work is about workforce development, keeping our kids in our state, all the work about juvenile justice and not over arresting our kids has been about keeping our kids employable and in our state. So I'm slightly aggravated that bill was not in the proposal that's coming out on the ARPA funds. And I know we have a lot of other things, but my bill looks at the fact that we want to look at the beginning and have programs like FFA and DECA. And I've been so excited about this bill. It also has HOSA, which is for the healthcare workers. These are opportunities for our kids to get into the businesses and get connected with professionals in the businesses across our state. The ag kids to get into those ag programs and get connected and stay here and see opportunity and have connections to be able to grow. But no, that's really not important enough. It wasn't a very important bill. I only got 2 votes, just so you all know. 2. And it's the one bill that deals with our kids in high school, working to promote them and bring them into this state, keep them here, get them educated, get them connected in the professions that they're looking at. It includes rising educators, so it would include teachers. It includes the HOSA, which includes healthcare people. I know I'm sounding aggravated, but I am aggravated about that. I think it's a bill that was totally overlooked. And I'm frustrated because after all the time I've spent trying to keep kids able to be in the workforce, fighting against them being over arrested, all that work for 8 years, and now we have a bill that has the opportunity to give kids access to the school to workforce pipeline, and nope, we're not interested. Much more important to work on the end of the whole program, much more important to be sure to and yes, it is important to encourage people to move here and to encourage them to stay, but it's also important to show opportunity and hope and give people the chance, give these kids a chance to see how fabulous our state is, how we can work and give them a job that's valuable and they can get paid.
1 minute.
So I am slightly aggravated. I appreciate the fact that the Appropriations Committee has worked their tail off. I wish they had discussed each of the bills. I know that they had a lot, but we have a lot in education and in judiciary, and we discuss and meet on those bills. So especially the ones that come out to the floor. So, and bills that people ask us to discuss. So that's a decision that everybody made in appropriations. I'm grateful for Senator Stinner and the work he does. He's an amazing person, and I don't wish I were doing what he's doing. But there is a significant bill that will help our kids to stay here on the front end. But it's just been thrown into the mess of everything else that's forgotten this year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansing Brooks. Senator Wishart, you're recognized.
Thank you. I wanted to rise as one of two that supported Senator Patty Pansing Brooks' ARPA request. Colleagues, if you had a chance to be in the hearing, it was one of the best hearings that we had in front of appropriations when it comes to ARPA, in my mind, because she had the majority of the testifiers as young people who are involved in these career technical clubs. In particular, I think it was DECA and some students that came from a Lincoln Public School that are involved in DECA who came and spoke to us. And it was incredible. The optimism that they have for their future makes me optimistic about our future. And so, yes, I would have loved to see Senator Pansing Brooks' bill make it through ARPA. I think this is something that merits further discussion regardless of ARPA in terms of a program where I believe we're the only in the country that doesn't put any skin in the game in terms of the state appropriating money towards these types of clubs. So again, the ARPA decision was tough. We had a very short turnaround and deadline for us to get through it all. And so we used a scoring system. And unfortunately, that means that not every piece of legislation, not even close to every piece of legislation that I would have liked to see come through ARPA, made it through. And Senator Pansing Brooks' bill was one of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close on AM 2382.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just want to remind everybody what the amendment actually does. It was simply to mimic the language below on line 27 through 30 to line 14 through 16. Many people think reasonable minds can differ, that they think they can be read together. So about 47 minutes ago, I said I was going to withdraw this motion, but people got a little into the conversation. So let me just respond to Senator Flood very quickly. Here's the answer, Senator Flood. A nonprofit can meet students where they are. That's the reason why you got your bill. A nonprofit who knows the community can meet students where they are, because oftentimes employers are in the community but don't necessarily know the community. I support the bill, but we got to question it when we talk about $20 million. With that, I'll withdraw my motion my amendment AM 2382.
Your amendment is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, I have a priority motion. Senator Wayne would move to recommit Legislative Bill 1012.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on your motion to recommit.
Call of the House.
Members, there's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
26 ayes, 3 nays to place the House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, there's a reason why I called the House, because Senator Stinner is going to call the House right after me, because we'll do a cloture vote here right after I get done speaking. So I just decided to call it a little bit early. I know we were originally going to go to 6:52. We went back and looked at the time, and it's going to be about 6:45. So just shutting off a 1 minute or two won't hurt anybody, I think, here. So colleagues, here's where we're at. There's going to be a cloture vote. I am asking you to be present, not voting. I think the Appropriation Committee has done a tremendous job of going through the budget. However, I feel the appropriation and this recommendations for the cash transfers overall leave out a significant portion of the community that I represent. Now, it isn't that I don't think things should go in other places. I think there should be. But in order for us to see the entire puzzle, we should know what that puzzle looks like before we start making it. So after here, we're going to have 2 more budget bills. I will not lead the filibuster, and quiet as kept. I don't think I led today's filibuster. I think you all led it yourselves. But the point is we're moving, and I get that. But until we see the overall package, the budget starting today on the board spends over $383 million on water and trails. I can't in good conscience vote for a budget that does not have dollars for the community that I represent, basic economic development, when we talk about cash transfers of over $513 million. So that's where we're basically at. I know that there's probably going to be a 46, maybe 43 to just a couple of us present not voting. But here's what I would tell you. If you say you care about North Omaha and you want to change North Omaha, I can't wait until we make changes potentially on the next budget or the next bill. We are voting on the bill in front of us. And the bill in front of us is setting up cash transfers that completely leaves out one of the most hardest hit areas from not just the pandemic, but for the last 50 years. There's very few census tracts that are harder hit than Senator McKinney's and I's census tracts. And when we have an extra $513 million not to appropriate anything to change that community, sends the message that Nebraska is not for everyone. And I hope this body will reverse that message by simply saying, let's go back to the drawing board and be present, not voting. With that, I'll withdraw my motion to recommit 158.
Motion to recommit is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on the desk.
I do, Mr. President. I do. Senator Stinner would move to invoke cloture pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
It is the ruling of the chair that there has been a full and fair debate afforded to LB 1012. Senator Stinner, for what purpose do you rise?
I would like to continue the call to the House as well as roll call in reverse order, please.
We are under call. All senators are now present. The motion is to invoke cloture. Please call the roll in reverse order.
Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Senator Williams. Voting yes. Senator Wayne. Not voting. Senator Walls. Voting yes. Senator Vargas. Voting yes. Senator Stinner. Voting yes. Senator Slama. Voting yes. Senator Sanders. Voting yes. Senator Panzine Brooks. Voting yes. Senator Pauls. Senator Merman. Voting yes. Senator Moser. Voting no. Senator Moorfield. Voting yes. Senator McKinney. Not voting. Senator McDonald. Voting yes. Senator McAllister. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Not voting, Senator Lindstrom. Voting yes, Senator Lathrop. Voting yes, Senator Coulterman. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Not voting, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hickelman. Voting yes, Senator Hilgers. Voting yes, Senator Matt Hansen. Not voting, Senator Ben Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Gregert. Voting yes, Senator Geist. Voting yes, Senator Friesen. Not voting, Senator Flood. Voting yes, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator Day. Not voting, Senator Clements. Voting yes, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator John Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Breesy. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Voting yes, Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Arch. Voting yes, Senator Albright. Voting yes, Senator Aguilar. Voting yes. 38 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, to invoke cloture.
The motion to invoke cloture is adopted. Members, the next vote is on the adoption of AM 2000. All those in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Have all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
41 ayes, 2 nays, Mr. President, on the adoption of committee amendments.
The amendment is adopted. Members, we will now vote on the advancement of LB 1012 to ENR initial. All those in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Have all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
38 ayes, 2 nays, Mr. President, on the advancement of the bill.
The motion is adopted. LB 1012 is advanced. Raise the call. Mr. Clerk, do you have any items?
I do. Before we proceed, Mr. President, amendments to be printed. Senator Wayne to 1013, Senator Matt Hansen, 1013. Senator Wayne to LB 1011. And Senator Friesen to LB 1012. In addition, new resolution offered by Senator Jacobson. That resolution will be laid over. Mr. President, proceeding on, next bill, Legislative Bill 1011. It's a bill introduced by the Speaker at the request of the Governor. It's a bill for an act relating to appropriations that amends laws 2021 LB 380. It defines terms, it provides changes, and eliminates appropriations for the operation of state government. The bill was introduced on January 13 of this year, at that time referred to appropriations, advanced to general file. There are committee amendments pending, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Stinner, you're recognized to open on LB 1011.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, LB 1011 happens to be the date of my birth, October 11th, so maybe there's some good karma in this. We'll find out. But LB 1011, introduced by the Speaker at the request of the Governor, is part of the Governor's 2022 mid-biennium adjustments, budget adjustments recommended for 2021 and to 2023 biennium. The bill makes adjustments to appropriations and reappropriations for the state operations, aid, and construction programs, and modifies intent language and earmarks accompanying appropriations approved by the 107th Legislature first session for the current fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022, and the next fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023. This legislative bill contains an emergency clause, and I will add that if you saw the preliminary budget, we basically adopted all of the recommendations from the Governor, except for the Perkins Canal, which was a request for $400 million. The crime lab, we had some questions on, so we left that out, which was about 16. The Department of Education was a combination of both general funds as well as federal funds. Obviously, you saw where we did add in the regular budget, and you'll see it as we worked that way. The Perkins Canal then became $53.5 million. The crime lab was put into the construction budget along with the Department of Education's request. With that, I would ask Mr. President to request a move to the amendment.
Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The committee amendment 1999 becomes the bill. The amendment contains the Appropriations Committee recommendations for new and adjustments to existing appropriations and reappropriations for state operations, aid, and construction programs, provides certain transfers, and modifies intent language and earmarks accompanying appropriations approved by the 107th Legislature first session for the current fiscal year, June 30th, 2022, and the next fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023. Details of the committee's recommendations can be found in our mid-biennium budget adjustment book that we passed out and have briefed everyone on. Please refer to the various pages that I'll try to identify. If you could go actually to page 4 or page 3, excuse me, you will see the general fund budget changes. These were the only change that this committee made over and above what the governor has done as it relates to this budget. The only change we made was for provider rates. You could see $94,620,000 with an offset, obviously, of $39,590,000. The net effect on general funds then was about $55 million. The rest are recommendations actually by the governor. Their salary changes that were negotiated during the fall of last year. You can see the impact of that is $62,473,000. Homestead exemption is being adjusted up $7.9 million for the current biennium, part of the biennium, and $11.7 for the second part of the biennium, or a total of $19.6 million. Other adjustments can be looked at in various sections There is transfers also that you can look at. These are all transfers that were recommended in the preliminary. It's on page 22. There has been a change just in the Perkins Canal, a transfer. So anyhow, you can refer to that. I know it's getting late, so I'm going to try to be as brief as I can with the comments that I've made. This budget actually came out of committee 7-2. With that, I would ask for your green vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, I now have amendments to the committee amendments. The first, Senator Lathrop, floor amendment 74.
Senator Lathrop, you're welcome to open on FA 74.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. Good evening, and thanks for sticking around. I know it'd be easy to cut out right now, but I think we have something very consequential to talk about tonight. I have no intention of trying to scuttle LB 1011 or the committee amendment, but I have a number of amendments because I want to take an opportunity to visit with you about corrections. And I think it's appropriate that we talk about corrections during a budget bill because it will become a huge budget problem if we don't address corrections this session. We are, in a very real way, at a crossroads in Nebraska when it comes to corrections. In July of 2020, the governor declared an overcrowding emergency. Actually, we were in an overcrowding emergency long before he declared it. We were placed into an overcrowding emergency because we reached over 140% of design capacity. We are actually at the Department of Corrections at 152% of design capacity. And I know for many of you, you have read, you have heard, but you have not been intimately involved, unless perhaps you're on the Appropriations Committee or the Judiciary Committee, with the issues related to the Department of Corrections and overcrowding. For a lot of you, this may seem like inside baseball. And I hope today and over the next several hours to have an opportunity to answer questions about the Department of Corrections, answer questions about the overcrowding, answer questions about the governor's proposal to spend $270 million to expand capacity. You should know that the Department of Corrections and the growth in the population in 2011, we appropriated and spent $179 million. Only 9 years later, in 2020, we budgeted and spent $272 million. So over 10 years, we have realized a 51% increase in the corrections budget. That doesn't tell the entire story, colleagues. Nationally, corrections populations have been reduced by nearly a quarter, while Nebraska's Department of Corrections population has grown by some 17% since 2011, and we are only one of 2 states in the entire country that have seen an increase in their population over the last 10 years, while other states across the country have seen a drop in their population. Nebraska has grown in its population. And while our population has grown, our admissions are down. We have passed out a chart, and I'd like you to take a look at this if you don't mind, and I'd like to walk you through this chart because it really tells the story. On the chart, you will see a blue line. That blue line represents design capacity at the Department of Corrections. There is a red line that represents operational capacity. By definition, operational capacity is 125% of design capacity. The black line represents our actual capacity, the actual average daily population. You can see the trend. In 2020, the Department of Corrections hired or contracted with a group called JFA. They do population projections all over the country. They've done 4 or 5 of them for us here in Nebraska. The dotted line that you see on this chart represents our projected average daily population. And I can tell you, having looked at a number of these, they are extremely accurate. You will see the blue and the red lines start moving up in 2018. They are flat before 2018 because the state did nothing to expand our capacity at the Department of Corrections, at least from 2005 through 2018. After Governor Ricketts came into office, he began to make investments in capacity at the Department of Corrections. So you will see those lines begin to move up. Each one of those represent additional capacity as a consequence of building that was appropriated by this legislature and requested by the governor. The last significant increase in that red and blue line represents the net effect of building the proposed prison and closing the penitentiary. So you can see very clearly from this chart that while we've attempted to build our way out of an overcrowding emergency, the red line never catches up with the black line or the dashed line on this chart. In fact, if we were to build the new facility that the governor has proposed, and we completed it 3 or 4 years from now, in 5 years, we would be 1,300 beds short of operational capacity. We would never get out of an overcrowding emergency. This same chart and this same topic came up in the Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations Committee has chosen to place the money for the new prison. It's been allocated but not appropriated. You won't see it in the bill that we'll take up today, but it's there. But as Senator Stenner noted in the Appropriations Committee, $270 million isn't what we need if we're not going to do something about the number of inmates at the Department of Corrections. We'll need $1 billion of building, and we'll need way more staff than we've been able to hire. And we'll have operating costs that will eat us alive. My concern today, and I will take plenty of time talking about the issues related to the Department of Corrections, but in my estimation, and I don't speak for the Appropriations Committee, but my belief is that you can't build more capacity until we do something about the growth in the average daily population. It will grow by 2.5% every year unless we do some type of criminal justice reform that flattens the trajectory. Until we do that, colleagues, this conversation belongs in a budget debate where we talk about what we want to be spending our money on, being smart on crime instead of incarcerating people for longer than is necessary. I'm happy as we go. How much more time do I have, Mr. Presiding Officer?
153.
Okay. We have, as a state, brought in CJI. I'll talk about that the next time I'm on the mic. CJI came in to do an analysis. I'll talk about what they found. I'll talk about the prison proposal. I also have some issues with the prison proposal in that we are trying to fund a prison before we have a facility study. I'll explain what a facility study is and why that needs to come before any appropriation for a prison. And with that, I'll yield the balance of my time. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have as we go through this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. The debate is now open. Senator McKinney, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of FA 74 because I think this is a great discussion to have tonight about the prisons and the proposal. And I was sitting here thinking, and I was like, you know, I know we have the Judiciary Committee, which is a good thing, but I also wish we had a board of corrections like the State Board of Education to, monitor the Department of Corrections a lot more, because I find many issues with the Department of Corrections and how they operate. And also, I'm strongly against this prison for many reasons. I do not think we could build our way out of the situation that our state is currently in. I know many people probably differ with me, but that it is what it is. But the facts are the facts that Nebraska has the 10th highest Black incarceration rate in the United States. We barely invest in communities like North and South Omaha. But people think it's a smart investment to build a prison instead of improving those communities and investing in those communities. But we also have people that are hesitant to vote for bills that would decrease the population and be smart on justice. Those that oppose LB 920 forget that a couple years ago, there was a bill passed in Congress called the First Step Act that went further. And you know who strongly supported that? President Trump. But nobody wants to talk about that. It's just, no, we can't do nothing. We're going to destroy the world if we pass 920 or any other bill. But hey, let's try to pass a bill to enhance felonies for bus drivers. Let's pass a bill to allow police to swab your mouth if you're charged with a crime. Those are okay, but things to be smart on justice and decrease the amount of people going inside and outside of our prisons are the end of the world. The world is going to end. And that's the problem. We have to change our philosophy in the way that we think about criminal justice. We could be smart. I know a lot of you are stuck in the 90s and would like to be tough on crime, but if you want to be tough on crime, then don't complain about property taxes. Don't stand up and say we need to address property taxes. We need to do all these things around taxes, but you want to support a bill or support a prison that is not even going to be $230 million by the end of it. Supply chains backed up. There's a war in Europe. It might be $500 million or more, but nobody wants to talk about that. And also, if we were to build this prison and we don't do nothing about this trend, by the time that prison comes online, we'll have to build another prison. We have to address not only the future population, but the current population. We have to be smart on justice and invest in people and assist them when they're getting out. People are getting out of prison with $100 check and being told to figure it out when they sat in prison 5 years, but they couldn't get programming because the department doesn't know how to properly staff our prisons. Then they want us to build a prison because they didn't keep up the maintenance at the Nebraska State Penitentiary, in which I feel like it was on purpose to try to justify building a prison. You got a director that comes to the Judiciary Committee that says, I can't advocate for bills, but he comes in and advocates basically against bills.
1 minute.
We really have to have a real conversation about this. And I'm not saying you got to disagree with me, but just saying no isn't going to work for anybody, not me, you, or the people that we serve, not the taxpayers. Just saying no to say no is not going to work. We have to come to some type of conversation or agreement on these things, or else we're going to keep trying to build our way out of a situation that's never going to work. And thank you. And I'll be back on the mic.
Thank you, Senator. Senator John Kavanaugh, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Lathrop and Senator McKinney, for raising this issue. I don't serve on the Judiciary Committee, but if anybody's ever watched, I spend a bit of time there. So I'm interested in these issues, of course. And I appreciate this handout that Senator Lathrop handed out with the chart, and I would certainly encourage everyone to look at it, think it over, ask some questions. And there's a lot of information in it, and it kind of tells you a lot of things. But I've talked about this as kind of a general theme of things that I talk about, which is that we bear the consequences of our actions, and we have an obligation to reconcile ourselves to those actions, to the consequences for our actions. And we need to take them into consideration whenever we take any conduct, when we pass any law, we undertake any idea. And that's what we're talking about here. This chart demonstrates that the proposition that building a prison for $270 million is not going to meet the obligation that is the natural consequence of our conduct, and that we are at a crossroads now where we can either continue to build well beyond what we're talking about, growing at a 2.5%, as Senator Lathrop said, a year in terms of individuals that we are incarcerating, human beings that we are locking up. And we can continue down that path and pay, but we have to make sure that we understand and we recognize when we continue on that path that there is, aside from the human cost, there is a monetary cost that the state of Nebraska bears for that choice. And that's the conversation we're having here. And that's why Senator Lathrop said this needs to be a conversation around the budget. That if you look at this chart, the suggestion that we're going to build our way out of this for the $270 million is obviously not true. That the suggestion that it will not increase our operating expenses is not true. The fact that if we choose to continue down the path that we're continuing without making some reforms, we are going to have a huge budgetary cost. And so that's why it's important to have this conversation. There are a lot of suggestions. Senator Lathrop will probably get up and talk about them some more with the CJI. And I'll push my light and keep talking. But I think if I have time, I wanted to read a quote from obviously somebody that I appreciate, an orator. It was President Kennedy. And when he spoke at the American University about peace, and he said that our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man. And man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. And what he's saying there is that we could find peace with the Soviet Union at that time, nuclear power that seemed unreasonable, and that the problem seemed intractable, obviously, that we could not resolve peace. We achieved a peace at that time, which now we're looking back and wondering how endurable that peace was. But he was setting out the challenge that these problems were caused by us and therefore can be solved by us. And we are presented with the same question here today if we have that will. So we can choose to appropriate hundreds of millions of dollars more to continue incarcerating at the rate more human beings than we have and continue to increase the number of people. Or we can find another way. We can do smarter things. We can do some of the things that were suggested by the CJI and find other things that are practical and that work for the state of Nebraska. There are suggestions out there. Other states have done this. Other states have decreased the level of incarceration, have found smarter ways to resolve these issues. And so that's the proposition we're talking about, we need to address as a body and as a state. Otherwise, we will be saddled with this cost and with growing costs of incarceration and administration of that incarceration going into the future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Flood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, members. I want to start with this. I think, as I understand it, LB 1011 doesn't appropriate the money to build a prison. It puts the money into a construction cash fund, which still requires appropriation by the legislature before a prison is built. My understanding is that the Nebraska State Penitentiary is at the end of its useful life. May I ask Senator Lathrop some questions?
Senator Lathrop, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator Lathrop, thank you for voicing your concerns and your thoughts and your efforts on criminal justice reform and our prison system. when was the state penitentiary? I'm talking about the state penitentiary at 27th and Highway 2 in Lincoln. When was that facility originally constructed?
Originally?
It was like 1888 or something like that?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything there that was part of the original construction, however, but I think that may be right. It may have been the first location of the first prison 100 years ago or something, but it's not 100 years old.
And as I understand it, the last major upgrade to the state penitentiary was in 1980.
We did, well, we've made some appropriations and done some housing units since 1980.
Okay. So I guess this summer, did we have, as I understand, didn't we have a situation where, was it the plumbing that wasn't working and they had to set up porta potties for the inmates?
That did happen.
And what was the cause? Was that a water system failure?
It was either a water or a sewer system failure. To be honest with you, I was out of town and that was all kind of happening while I was, I think, on vacation.
So in your opinion, does that, I mean, given where you sit and what you've seen with all of the information that you've collected over all the years and the work that you've done, in your opinion as a senator, does the state penitentiary, is that a facility that needs to be replaced?
So does it need to be replaced? Yes. Yes. Probably right away, not necessarily, but does it need to be replaced soon? Yes.
So here's a question, and I'm trying to find a middle ground between where some of the prior speakers and where you were at and where maybe the committee of the Appropriations Committee is at. What if we put a caveat in the budget language that said, we do intend to build a new facility, and it is the intent of the legislature to essentially mothball or vacate the real estate at 27th and Highway 2 so that it, and I'm sure you're familiar with the vacation of a real estate under the state terms. It first has to be offered to any other public entity, and then it can be put up to the highest bidder. If we did that, can't we get through this replacement issue without further delay? Would that address the concerns of you, for instance?
No.
And that's not a trick question.
No. And I appreciate the question because it gets to the central point, which is until we do something about the population growth, and we are outliers in the country on this issue, until we do something about the population growth, building these 1,500 beds will be a start. It will be a start, and the $270 million we spend, we'll need to double it if we want to take care of what we'll need between now and 2030. Only 5 years after this place would be completed, or 4.
And there was a study done that looked at replacing the current systems and buildings there, and that was about an estimate of $220 million. Is that right?
You're exactly right. That was the Alvine study, and I'm going to talk about that next time I'm on the mic.
Okay, what I would say here is that at the end of the day, I think there's two separate issues, and they are being linked by Senator Lathrop for obvious reasons, but we need a new state penitentiary. I don't think anybody here would object to mothballing everything that we have at 27th Highway 2. Let the city of Lincoln have it. Let that go to bidder. That's in a perfect spot for anything from a community college to a housing development. I mean, that's prime real estate on Highway 2 with rail access. I think that we should move forward, build a replacement facility just on, and I'll say this word, humanitarian grounds, given what I've heard about the condition of the current state penitentiary. And then we're going to have an opportunity later this year on LB 920.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Lathrop, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the question, Senator Flood. And I want to address Senator Flood's remark that these are separate issues. Because if they are separate issues, we are going to ignore the problem that is requiring all this capacity and just say, nah, we're not going to worry about that 920. We'll deal with 920 at some point. That's a separate issue. And then we'll go ahead and start building these 1,500 beds. Colleagues, that facility, that 1,500 beds isn't going to be enough. It's not enough. If we close the penitentiary, and the penitentiary right now has a design capacity of penitentiary has a design capacity of 818, an operational capacity of 1,000, and we have 1,300 people in it. If we close the pen, as Senator Flood has suggested, and build the 1,500 beds, we're spending $270 million to get 700 more beds. Okay? If you're thinking about, and that's why I think it's important that we do this during the budget. That doesn't make sense. Because it won't, that 700 beds, we're going to need 1,300 just as fast as we can build them. And that's just a start. Until we find a way to flatten the line on the graph that I shared with you, we will be attempting to build our way out of it, or we will be kicking the can down the road. But it doesn't work. This is one of the most significant issues facing the state, colleagues. It's not a lake. It's not a ditch. It's not the ARPA money. It is, what are we going to do about the growth in our prison population? Because until we get a handle on it, you are going to be back here reducing property tax cuts. You are going to have to come up with a lot of money to build beds. And if you build another one of these things and got it done in 2030, you'd need to build 200 more a year. 200 more a year. Otherwise, talking about building, we don't know what to build until we know what our population is going to be going forward. And that's the point of this conversation. That's why the prison wasn't appropriated by the Appropriations Committee. That's the issue today. And I've been here 12 years, and you're probably tired of me saying that, but every time that we come into this body, we look around at the beginning of the year and say, what are the major issues that we need to address this year? Right? Maybe it's property taxes. Maybe it's finding a business tax incentive plan. Maybe it is dealing with a canal that brings water in from Wyoming. Whatever those issues are, we know what they are, and this has to be on the top of the list. It has to be on the top of the list. And I'm talking about, we need to figure out how to solve that issue. And I'm going to tell you that a lot of people have done a lot of work on it over the last 9 months, and I'm going to talk about that too. But they're not separate issues. Why would we build 1,500 beds to improve our capacity by 700 and still need 1,300 more beds 4 years later? Like, we need more land, we need a different plan. If you guys don't want to do corrections reform, and we'll have that conversation eventually down here, if you don't want to do that, then get ready to spend more money on corrections. And I mean a lot more on operating costs, and that assumes that we can staff it. I appreciate that the governor is now offering $28 an hour to new staff. And did we have a lot of the old former people come back? Yes, we did. And do we have some people that are coming in from out of state? Yes, we do. We expect a surge at the front end of this offer, but will we be able to staff? We're 150 short, and we're about to open 384 beds over at Lincoln Correction Center. If you haven't toured it, you can.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator DeBoer, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, if you hear some frustration in Senator Lathrop's voice or any of the other Judiciary Committee members, it's because I think maybe many of us feel a little bit like the Greek character from Greek mythology, Cassandra. Cassandra is given the future sight. She has that gift, but no one will ever believe her. So she predicts the future and no one ever believes her. And I guess for me, that's a little bit what it feels like when we have this chart that we have here that Senator Lathrop has passed out to you. And when we come up on the floor and we say, the sky is kind of falling for real in corrections. We have an overcrowding emergency for a couple of years now. And it's not getting better. I feel like we come in here and we say bad things are coming, and it feels a little bit like shouting into the void. This chart literally keeps me up at night. I think about the men and women who work in these facilities. I think about the people who are incarcerated in these facilities. And I think about our community, and it keeps me up at night. What are the consequences from this overcrowding? From this overcrowding that is getting increasingly worse? Like, we need to flatten this curve. Remember flatten the curve? Here's a curve we got to flatten. Most of the people who are incarcerated will get out. They'll come back into our community at the end of their sentence. What has happened to them in the time that they're in their incarceration? Think about the fact that at some facilities, there's a facility that was at 300% capacity. If any of you have had to stay in for quarantine over the last couple of years, you know what it's like to be in your house. Maybe you have an apartment. You get twitchy. Now imagine having 3 times too many people and a much smaller place. And doing that year after year. When you come out of that situation, do we imagine that you will be a reformed citizen? I have concerns about that. If we have to let people out a little early because we literally have no other space for them, what does that mean for our communities? Second of all, good, decent people work there. We see them. They come and talk to us. These are hardworking Nebraskans who work in our corrections department and deserve so much thanks from us. Their working conditions are not good. And the reason they're not good is because they have to watch over way more people than the facility that they are in was designed to house. So somebody says to me, oh, I don't care about the inmates in there. We can talk about that as a separate issue. Think about the people who are working there. These are your neighbors. Senator Wishart has a lot of them in her district. Good people. I think about them at night. There are inmates there. Their lives are affected.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I worry about riots. I worry about riots. You think, oh, she's saying the sky is falling. Wasn't there something about Chicken Little, Senator Lowe? The sky is falling. We have too many people in there. A lot too many. Sometime it's going to be too much. How do we fix it? I will grant you there's probably a combination of things we need to do. But we take on big problems in this place. We take on property taxes. We take on the St. Francis service area problems. We take on the Social Security taxes. We take on water issues. Whatever you've done in your committee, we take those on. We need to take this
Senator.
on. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McKinney, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise again in support of FA 74 because we cannot build our way out of this. You cannot grow the state building prisons. Go talk to the people in Tecumseh. Nobody wants a prison in their community, honestly. Then we talk about the useful life of NSP. Let's talk about the deferred maintenance that the Department of Corrections and the governor refused to do. Let's talk about that. The water main break, deferred maintenance. They could fix it, but they say, oh, we don't really want to do it because we're overcrowded. Let's talk about that. And vacating NSP is not an option because they want to repurpose it for medium security or minimum security. But they don't say that, but that's what they want to do. This is not two separate issues. This is one issue. Criminal justice reform is one issue. Whether you want to talk about building something or passing a bill to change sentencing, to me, that's one issue. And then we want to talk about humanity. If we're going to be humans and speak about humanity, it's humane to invest in people and invest in the communities where they're coming from so they never end up in a prison. It's not humane to keep trying to raise felonies for mentally ill individuals. It's not humane to disproportionately target individuals, and now our state has the 10th highest Black incarceration rate in the state. Is that in the country? Is that humane? Then we talk about community. A lot of people inside right now, I know, when I go in, I asked Senator Lathrop when we went to Tecumseh, I knew almost everybody on the yard. Go to NSP, I know a lot of people in there as well. Wherever you go, I know them. So when you talk about community, a lot of people from my community are in our prisons, and they're not just Black, they're white and Latino as well. People I grew up with, people that I've known. Yes, they may have committed offense. I'm not excusing that, but that doesn't make them less than human. Let's talk, if we're talking about humanity and being humane, we cannot build our way out this issue. Even if we were to agree to build a prison, that would take 5 years. So for another 5 years, our prisons would be overcrowded. Are we forgetting that part? If we were still to build a prison for 5 years, our prisons would still be overcrowded. Are we going to disregard that fact and not do anything? That is the problem. That's the issue I have with this body. You're being unreasonable. Oh, let's just mothball NSP and get rid of the problem. You're not going to get rid of the problem because we could vote today to build another prison and our prisons would still be overcrowded and we still have issues. And we're talking about being humane and humanity. Let's be real here. We have to, one, I don't agree with ever building a prison just based on a lot of principles that I just strongly disagree with. Two, we need to pass some reforms. Your favorite president ever in the last 20 years passed a bill in Congress that went further than 920, but we got people opposing 920 right now. Let's talk about that. It's unreasonable. We cannot build our way out this problem. We have to pass legislation to decrease the curve, or else even if we were to build another prison, we would have to build another prison in another 10 years. And where are we going to put it? Fremont doesn't want a prison. North Omaha definitely doesn't want a prison. Tecumseh barely wants a prison. So where are we going to place it? Let's be real here and really think about this. Again, before I get off the mic, and I'll get back on and explain what's compared the First Step Act to 920 so we can have another real conversation. But even if we were to vote to build a prison, it would take 5 years or more. It's maybe more now. There's a war in Europe and supply chain is going to be backed up and we're still going to be overcrowded. And we're talking about humaneness and humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator John Kavanaugh, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So again, I rise in, well, I guess probably end up being in support of LB 1011, but what we're talking about now is whether or not to build additional prison capacity. And I do recognize how the money is moved around and it's not a direct appropriation for this, but it is, if we're talking about moving forward with this, we need to be talking about it well in advance of doing it. But I just pulled out a map here of the state pen, and I know a lot of people like to say things like it's 100 years old and it's well past its useful life. And obviously, as people have talked about, there are parts of it that need improvement, as Senator McKinney was just talking about, deferred maintenance fund. But I just thought I'd go through and list off the age of some of these buildings. And we'll start with, there's a housing unit built in 2020. There's another housing unit built in 1981, another housing unit built in 1993, another housing unit built in 1981, another one built in 1981, activity center in 75. Let's see what this one is. The industry factory was 1955. The private vendor building, 1972. The cantina, 1981. So housing unit built in, let's see, 98. And then there's a medium security unit built in 1954. And then there's a bunch of others. Obviously, I know people probably don't want to hear me just keep listing off numbers. But I can't find anything much older than, well, the 50s, which is pretty old, but that is a facility. And there's the housing units are all built in the 80s or later. There's a chapel built in 1931. So when people say 100 years old, they're referring to the fact that this has been the site of the penitentiary for that length of time, not how old are the buildings here. So when people think about what this facility is, they need to make sure that they're not thinking about it in the context of, I guess, the movies. But again, there is definitely a necessity for upgrades, improvements, things like that, and to make the term of incarceration for individuals when they are required and necessary to be incarcerated a more humane experience. And we certainly should make sure that people have an opportunity to get treatment, classes, room for growth, so when they come out, they're in a better position than they were when they went in. But we need to also make sure we are not incarcerating people that are unnecessary to incarcerate, meaning that we are not, one, sending people to prison for things that are not in the interest of safety of the community, not in the interest of rehabilitation for the individual, and that we are not being specifically punitive, meaning just punishing people for the sake of punishing people. I know people believe in deterrence effect of sentences, and looking at sentences when individuals are potentially considering committing a crime. There are a lot of crimes that individuals commit without that consideration. So it's not as an effective a deterrent as you might think to most people. But when we are talking about a prison, when we're talking about the budget, we're talking about long-term projections. We've had a long conversation about what the out-year budget looks like, how much money we're going to have on an estimated growth of the revenue projections. We need to make sure that we are—
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thinking also towards making sure we're not spending money on things that will blow up the budget, making in terms of increasing the budget at a huge rate. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. And again, we talked about this cost of building a new facility is not going to actually solve the overcrowding problem. And I would again tell you to take a look at the flyer there that Senator Lathrop handed out with the difference between rated capacity and actual capacity, and make sure that think about it again and ask those questions. But I think I'm going to be out of time in a second here. I'll push my light and get back on. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Wishart, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise in opposition to the floor amendment, but in support of the conversation that Chairman Lathrop is having today on the budget. Colleagues, if it was up to me, we would take the money that we've set aside for the prison and we'd put the entire thing into the North Omaha plan. If that was up to me, that's what we do. And so the middle ground is what I think this Appropriations Committee has put forward, where we've set the money aside and the Department of Corrections has to meet some obligations that we have requested from last year to show us their full vision for how they're going to manage in an efficient and effective way the correction system that, from what I've witnessed, we have continued on Appropriations Committee to invest in and not seen the results that the state or this legislature should expect out of the department. I want to turn your attention to the amount of funding that this legislature, since I've been in the body, has put in the amount of beds that we funded. And yet we're still here today. Renovation and housing at CCC Lincoln. We did that in 2015, 2016. Reception and Treatment Center, DEC and LCC. We built that. We did a state penitentiary dormitory project, some more beds. High security housing units. We did that pretty recently. And then now the department comes back for more beds. Last year, when our committee pushed back on the department and said that we need to have metrics to understand your vision moving forward for the entire Department of Corrections system, there were a couple things that we specifically asked in legislation that were due before we would even consider appropriating money for a correctional facility. And two of those items have not been completed yet. One is a risk assessment analysis of the levels of security in which we are incarcerating people in our current correction system. We need to understand, are we effectively incarcerating people at the right level of security to meet the public safety needs of the state, but also to meet the rehabilitation needs of that particular inmate? We have not, I believe, received that yet. I think Chairman Stinner has more of a pulse on the timing of that. We also asked for a master plan for the entire Department of Corrections, which we have yet to receive. We put in hundreds of thousands of dollars to receive that master plan. We have not had a master plan done for years in terms of the Department of Corrections, looking at all of the facilities that the Department of Corrections is responsible for and getting us a plan on how we intend to utilize all of those facilities. I would require that before I would ever think of putting up a new correctional facility. And last, I want to say that from the appropriations perspective, the dialogue around this specific appropriations has changed drastically within the last 3 years in terms of our communication with the Department of Corrections. First, it was that we need to build
1 minute.
an additional correction facility on top of the penitentiary. Well, actually, first it was, let's do a public-private partnership to build a prison. Then it was, let's build an additional correctional facility, a new prison on top of the old penitentiary, in addition to the old penitentiary, just to be clear. And we would utilize that penitentiary for minimum security. And now it's that penitentiary is unlivable. Before we make a major investment on top of the investments we've already made in corrections, we need to make sure that we have fully vetted this project. And two, we need to look as if we have done everything possible in someone like Senator McKinney's district to address the cradle to prison pipeline that exists. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McCollister, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. I didn't speak at all on LB 1012, but I'm certainly going to speak on this issue, and I contend this is a fight worth having. I've been involved with criminal justice reform for at least 12 years. When I was at the Platt Institute, we engaged with this very topic. And we looked to Texas, of all states, to look at what criminal justice reform can do. They had an enlightened person, a number of senators, and they decided that they're going to take a look at criminal justice reform. And by doing that, they closed a number of prisons. And what's going on in Texas is not unusual. A number of states around the country have been involved with CJI, and they've been able to engage and make criminal justice reform occur in those states. And they've lowered prison populations without endangering public safety. So I think this is a conversation we need to have no matter how long it takes. Criminal justice reform bridges a wide political spectrum. In fact, you'll see that the ACLU, ALEC, CJI, they are all saying essentially the same thing. By looking at sentencing, parole, we can actually reduce prison populations, and that's something we should do. In 1980, we had 1,400 inmates in our prison system, and now, 42 years later, we have about 5,500, and that makes absolutely no sense. We can actually improve public safety and reduce prison populations. They are not mutually exclusive. As I said, a large number of states have done this, engaged in this process, and we need to do that in Nebraska. We need to lower the prison population in Nebraska. I look at the elderly prisoners we have in our system, long past the time that they're likely to commit crimes, and they should be paroled immediately. And one element of LB 920 was to do that. And the governor did not agree to that particular provision. It makes no sense. Chief Justice came in here and we talked about the cost of putting a person in prison. And I had previously thought it was around $35,000. No, it's approximately $50,000. So how do we want to spend the state's money? Are we going to build prison after prison after prison, house people unnecessarily? There's an opportunity cost that we're missing. If you want property tax relief, if you want income tax relief, you're not going to get it if you spend all the money on prisons. It makes no sense to do this, and we need to engage with everyone in the legislature and take a hard look at this and decide which direction we want to go. I yield the balance of my time to Senator McKinney.
Senator McKinney, your yield 135.
Thank you, Senator McAllister. I just want to say, I probably can't get on the mic again, but I was just thinking, this building is over how many years old? 100 something probably. Should we mothball this building because it's past its useful life? No, we shouldn't, because we've kept up the maintenance. But the Department of Corrections has decided not to keep up the maintenance to try to justify building a prison. And that is the problem. Again, there was a bill passed by Congress, the First Step Act, which goal was to reduce the size of the federal prison population while maintaining public safety, signed in law by President Trump. The goals of 920 is to reduce recidivism, improve public safety, shift resources to be more cost effective. But people oppose that. Maybe Senator Lathrop probably should have been a Republican and introduced 920. It might have helped. I don't know. But we need to get smart on criminal justice in this state, or else we're going to continue this cycle. We can't build our way out of it, because if we voted to build a prison today, it would take 5+ years, and we'll still be overcrowded and still have these issues, which is why we need to pass reforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McAllister. Senator McKinney. Senator Lathrop, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I want to take a moment to talk about a second reason why I have a problem with the prison proposal. And that is, it's a process thing, but this is, sometimes you hear people talk about process and you might roll your eyes. This is kind of a big deal. So if you want to go about building a prison, here's how you do it. You have a facility study done. Let me tell you what a facility study is, because we've had one done in 2006, we had another one done in 2014, and the Appropriations Committee budgeted for an update in the last appropriations bill that we thought we'd have at the beginning of the year. So let me tell you what a facility study is and why it is important if you're going to build a prison. A facility study is where you bring experts into your state and they do an assessment. The first thing they do is project your prison population. So they look at the trends, much like the JFA report, that's that dotted line. They look at the trends for incarceration. They look at the trends by security level. So not all cells are the same. There's maximum security, there's medium, there's lower custody levels, and there's community custody, right? The community custody are very cheap beds to build. The maximum security are very expensive beds to build. And so you get a study that shows what's your population going to do? How many beds do you need at the high security level, medium security level, lower security level, and community custody? Then they do an inventory of the beds you have. And they show you where you need to build, what kind of beds to build. Do you need the expensive high security ones? Do you need the cheaper community custody beds, right? The Appropriations Committee put in the appropriations bill last year for them to update this report. If you want to build a prison, do the facility study and tell us what you need. Have the experts come in, and you don't make an investment that's somewhere near $300 million without this step. You don't do it. What happened is the Department of Corrections said, yeah, we got that report coming, not in January like we expected, not when it would be useful in January, which we asked for, but in August. In August. Guess where we'll be in August? Not here. So one of the really, the due diligence that you do before you make this kind of an investment, that kind of due diligence has not been done. And it won't be done until after they start building. So we will arbitrarily make a decision to build high and medium security beds that we may or may not need. We may not even need high security beds, and they're the most expensive beds. We also commissioned a study with UNO to look at our classification system. Are we calling, how many people do we have in the high security level of classification that actually are lower security people? But we've raised them up to high because they're long-termers, and we're going to send them to Tecumseh, which is a high security place. Those two studies are really important for us in our due diligence before we make the investment. Did you say time?
1 minute.
Okay. Those studies weren't done. And they won't be done till after we're supposed to make a decision about building a prison. Now, you've heard me talk that I have a concern that we need to solve both of these problems before we move forward on either one of them, and I believe that. But there is a second reason. We haven't done the things you need to do, the steps you need to take, the due diligence that must be done before you make an investment that approaches $300 million. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that issue anymore, just to tell you that hasn't been done, and that's a second reason why I strongly oppose the construction of the new prison. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Pansing Brooks, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that since I've been here in 2015, we've continued to talk and talk and talk about this. One of the things that I discussed in 2015 and have used every year since has been the vicious cycle that we have in prisons and prison reform. So we know that we have overcrowding, and that's why some of the discussion is to, oh, well, let's solve it by building a new prison. But with that overcrowding, we have understaffing. And due to the understaffing, we have a lack of programming because the guards, there aren't enough guards to take the inmates to the programming, and there aren't enough rooms to take the inmates to for the programming. So we have overcrowding, which leads to understaffing, which leads to a lack of programming. That then leads to more people that end up not getting parole and jamming out, which then of course leads to recidivism, which then again leads to our overcrowding. So we have this continuous vicious cycle that we have been talking about all of my 8 years in this legislature, and we haven't dealt with two of the things that could help. We haven't created a robust program for programming, and we haven't done as much on sentencing reform as we should have. So if you look at the JFA table that's on the website for the Judiciary Committee, Table 11, page 25, shows the males that were released fiscal year 2019 with their length of stay. And if you look at some of the ones, just pulling out a couple, the homicides, there were 24 homicides. 92% were paroled, which was pretty good. 8% were discharged. That means jammed out. So then you go to the next level, and it's sex and morals. And the men that have had problems with that, 28% of them are jammed out. Jammed out without programming. That means they aren't having anybody follow them along. We have talked and talked about sentencing reform, and what are we doing? If 28% of the people that are in for sex crimes are jamming out and not having the requisite supervision that they need, what in the world are we doing? You think we're making our community safer? We're not. So this is just the continual discussion of the fact that some people just want to build a prison. I co-chaired the Lincoln Public Schools bond issue with former Senator Kathy Campbell. It's for $250 million. And for the first part of that campaign, we had a 1.5 year study talking to the schools in the community about what was needed, talking to the people in the community about what was needed, talking to the teachers and the administrators about what was needed. And we came up with a decision that touched every doorstep and every zip code. But that was after a study where we knew what to do. There was discussion about tearing down Southeast High School, my alma mater. That opened, Southeast High School opened in about 1960, and they were going to tear it down. But because of the study, they found out that yes, while something like $36 million were going to be spent, that was far better and a far better value to spend that to refurbish Southeast High School than to tear it down and try to rebuild from scratch. So right now we're being asked to decide an issue to build a prison without a study. You heard Senator Lathrop talk about that. I think it's short-sighted. Maybe building a prison is the best choice, but without a study, how will we ever really know? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Clerk, for announcements.
Mr. President, just one announcement. The Natural Resources Committee will be holding an executive session immediately following the conclusion of their hearing tomorrow. Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Hughes would move to adjourn the body until Wednesday, March 16 at 9:00 a.m.
Question is, shall the legislature adjourn until Wednesday morning at 9:00? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion is successful.